watching closely.
What's the secret, Max?
You just gotta find something you love to do and then do it for the rest of your life.
I don't want to be a product of my environment. I want my environment to be a product of me.
Hello, and welcome to The Establishing Shot, a podcast where we do deep dives into directors and their filmographies. I am your host, Eli Price, and we are here on episode 52 of the podcast in our early Spielberg series covering his movies from the 70s and 80s. And we are getting closer and closer to the end of this series. Getting into 1985's The Color Purple today. So this will be a fun and interesting discussion, to say the least, just with some controversy maybe around this movie that we'll get into later on. But I have a first-time guest on the show with me today. He's a friend of mine, here in Lafayette, Louisiana with me. Joining us is Christian Robertson. Christian, glad to have you on. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me, Eli. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So it is a stormy night here in Lafayette. So we'll try to make sure most of the rain noise is out in post. But we if you hear some rain over the podcast, that's just the way it goes with podcasting. So, Christian is joining me. Christian, why don't you tell a little bit about who you are, what you do, just fill people in on the world of Christian.
Yeah, the world of Christian. It's I would say it's expensive a bit, but so I live here in Lafayette. I went to UL here in Lafayette as a sports medicine major. So for about 10 years before COVID, I was full-time doing sports medicine, taking care of athletes, when they get hurt, and covering a lot of high school games, some college stuff. Did that in Denver as well. Did my master's in health administration. So now, since COVID, I've been working as a analyst for a hospital system here in Louisiana. I have 2 kids, 1 kid on the way, which is crazy. 3 kids is crazy. Yeah. But we're going for it. I've been married to Blair for almost 11 years. We're making 11 years this summer.
Yeah,
that's
awesome.
Crazy too. It's a big blessing, though.
Yeah, that's awesome. I have the 2 kids, and I'm like, I don't know about 3.
Yeah, it's something, and the baby's not even here yet. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. Christian also has done a little bit of dabbling in the acting world. If you want to share a little, we're going to actually do next episode a deeper dive into Christian's acting and just his experience with that. Do you want to give a little tease of your experience as far as that goes?
Yeah, so it's always been a dream for a very long time, and thankfully I've had the opportunity to dabble in it for sure.
Yeah.
And it's so fun. It's something about doing your dream, So it's crazy. You go on set, you do the job, you're having a ton of fun, but then I got to go back to quote unquote real life, because this is more of a hobby at this point. But if someone comes calling and knocking on my door, I'm definitely going to answer it. But I'm living the dream when I get to be on set. So
yeah. Well, maybe when this podcast, blows up in the future, which is kind of like the cross my fingers kind of thing. Someone will be like, "Oh, there's that Christian guy that was on that one episode. Need to get him on in my movie."
Absolutely. My DMs are always open, so hit me up.
Oh yeah, slide on in. Well, yeah. So we are obviously covering Spielberg in this series. Do you remember your first experience with a Spielberg movie? It's always a hard question.
It is a hard question because I was so young watching this particular movie. I didn't know what a director was,
Right,
per
exactly.
se, at this point, but it was definitely Jaws.
Okay.
And Jaws was one of those movies that always played on TBS. It was one of those movies that was always on, and you remember the little da-na, da-na,
Oh, yeah.
that little part of it. And I just thought it was crazy. So much so, I don't even really swim at the beach because, obviously there are sharks in the water. So I'm going to stay away from that. But
yeah,
Jaws was definitely my first one.
That's awesome. I don't know that I've gotten that answer yet. So that's really cool to hear. Jaws is my favorite Spielberg movie. So nothing's dethroned it yet. I've been filling in some blind spots in this series. But yeah, nothing has come and dethroned the great beast of Jaws quite yet. So
that shows how great of a movie it is, because he has a lot of great movies, and for none of them to dethrone that for you, that's saying something.
Yeah, it is, and it's funny because it's his only his second theatrical released movie, which is wild. But yeah. Yeah. Anyway, today we are going to be covering The Color Purple. This is I'm trying to think. This would be Spielberg's. Let me count it out. I don't have it open in front of me, so I can't count it out. I want to say this is like 8, somewhere around there. His 8th film, maybe. Something like that. I should have looked that up before before we started recording. That would have been the smart podcasting move. But alas, here we are.
I trust your guess on that.
Yeah, that's a guess. And so, if you're listening and you're like, that's wrong, you can just write me an email and be like, hey, it's not his 8th movie. And I'll be like, I know, because I looked it up as soon as I stopped recording and saw how wrong I was. But anyways, yeah, it's deeper into his career. He is like Steven Spielberg at this point. Like Steven Spielberg in like neon next to the Hollywood sign at this point, basically.
Sure. Yeah.
So that's where we are in the series. We're at mid 80s at this point. So we started off in the kind of the late 60s, early 70s, talking about his TV career that he started off with, and so yeah, we're a good 15 years into his career at this point. But yeah, The Color Purple itself does not begin with Steven Spielberg, though. Obviously, it would be really strange if Steven Spielberg wrote this material himself.
I would agree to
that. But yeah, before we dig into that, I was curious. So I always give like my guests like, hey, here's some movies open. What are you interested in? And you chose The Color Purple. Have you seen The Color Purple before doing this, or do you have like a history with it, or did you just choose it because you're like, oh, I've never seen that, I want to watch that?
So it's a few things. So number one, I've never seen it prior to this, preparing for this episode.
Yeah.
And I saved it specifically for this, but it was such a quoted movie in my family.
Gotcha. Yeah.
I felt like I saw it,
Yeah,
because I
yeah,
kind of knew what was going on. And as I'm watching it and the lines they would say, I'm like, oh, my nanny would say this. I'm like, oh, my teenagine would say this all the time.
yeah.
It's like, oh, that's where that comes from. Okay.
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
it just kind of connected the dots for me. But another reason I chose it was because the new remake, the musical
Hmm.
form of The Color Purple, was released a couple of months ago. So
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
I figured this would be a good time to go back and actually watch the original and
Oh
then go
yeah.
ahead and watch the remake with Fantasia and Taraji
Yeah.
P. Henson and the whole crew.
Yeah. Did you watch both of them?
I didn't see the new one yet. I
Okay.
heard it was pretty good.
Yeah, I thought it was I enjoyed it. We can talk a little bit about it later. But yeah, I thought it was pretty good. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, this is my first time watching it too. It was one of my blind spots that I was
Okay.
excited to fill in during this series. So, but I did realize, it's funny because we've been on social media back and forth about the whole like Kendrick Drake beef, and
Right.
when I just happened to be thinking about the song "All Right" by Kendrick, and I realized
Yeah.
that it's a Color Purple reference that he starts the
Oh,
song with. He starts the song with "All my life I had to fight,"
yeah, yeah,
and I was
yeah,
like, it just like clicked. I was like, wait a second,
yeah. Right.
that's a Color
That's
Purple reference.
the most
Um,
iconic line,
I
probably.
know that Oprah delivers with such strength and power. Yeah.
And there was a cool thing about Oprah doing that scene too that we probably will get into, but I
Oh
thought it
yeah.
was incredible.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. But yeah, let's jump back to the beginning, with Alice Walker, who wrote the book, the novel The Color Purple that the movie
Mhm.
is adapted from. She was born in 1944, just 2 years before Spielberg. Um, but she was born in Eatonton, Georgia, to sharecropper parents. Now I know I'm from Georgia originally, and I know you have at least family in Georgia, right? Have you spent any time in Georgia?
I have spent a little bit, not very much, and it's
Yeah.
more distant family. I'm
Okay.
more tied to Atlanta or Georgia because of the Atlanta Falcons,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Okay.
that's my whole connection. And Chick-fil-A and Coca-Cola. So
Yeah. I mean, it's some great things from Atlanta for sure. Chick-fil-A and Coca-Cola alone is enough to get excited
exactly.
about the ATL. Um, but yeah, so she's from Georgia, from grew up in Eatonton, which is very rural Georgia. She was involved in the civil rights movement in the '60s, and then I think I want to say this was like her third novel, and maybe her 10th book overall, is what I
Gotcha.
remember reading. And yeah, so she wrote this book in 1982. And it is an epistolary novel, which is a big word for saying it's a collection of like letters, like fictional letters, that the main character Celie is writing to God. They all start with "Dear God,"
Hmm.
and it's a letter. So yeah, it's very interesting. I listened to the book on audiobook, um, in the past month, kind of on and off, riding the car and whatnot. And yeah, so I actually finished the book before I watched the movie, which I don't do all that often, to be honest.
Okay.
But uh, I was like, well, this is like kind of a classic book. I was like, so yeah, I should like read it. And it just so happened that I had access to the audiobook through the library. So I was like, oh, it'll be easier to listen to it. So
Right.
but yeah, so um I really enjoyed the book a lot. I thought it was like an incredibly written book. Um like kind of one of those like, oh yeah, it makes sense why this is such a classic, when you read it. sort of book.
I had no idea it was a book
Yeah.
until, kind of doing a little bit of research. I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So she wrote it. She wrote it a little bit out of her own experience, and also like kind of her family's background a little bit. She wanted it to focus not on white people dominating over black people,
Right.
obviously, but kind of more she was drawing from kind of stories of her own family of um, black men that dominated over black women. And
Hmm.
so just she had a couple of grandfathers that she heard stories about and very like misogynistic, and but when she knew them they were like very like mellowed out, not really that way anymore. And so it was just like this question in her mind of like, how do people change?
Right.
That like was part of the inspiration, I guess, behind the book. um it also like she talks about in interviews how it was kind of like like she wanted to challenge traditional theology as well.
Hmm.
So that's kind of like baked into the book a little bit. I found it pretty interesting the way she explores that and talks about it. um I wrote down this, she in the interview that was on the Blu-ray disc with her, I thought this was super interesting. She said, you cannot possibly be free until you have a personal connection to whatever God is. I was like, oh, that's really interesting.
Hmm.
And you can kind of see that. You can kind of see that idea kind of in the movie. Um,
Right.
it's a little bit more vague in the movie than it is in the book. Um, but yeah, the book had some controversy around it. Um, and it was kind of, I think it was more amplified when the movie came out than
Right.
the book, which makes sense. More people see movies than probably in pop culture than necessarily are like reading all the
Right.
same books, so that makes sense. But it did win the Pulitzer Prize for nonfiction for fiction in 1983, which is crazy. And I'm pretty sure
Yeah.
she was the first Black woman to win a Pulitzer Prize.
Oh wow.
Um,
Okay.
so yeah,
That's a big deal.
so this is a really like prestigious work. Um, it's not like just some like little novel that someone thought was interesting is like, I'm gonna adapt this. It's like, no, this is a
Right.
Pulitzer Prize winning novel, um, from the first Black woman to win a Pulitzer Prize. So
Yeah.
really big deal. Um, and she didn't really at first want to give up the rights to the book to become a film. She was very wary about that. A couple of producers approached her, Peter Guber or Guber, I don't know exactly how to say his last name, um, and John Peters. I'm just going to say Guber, Guber. Sounds right to me.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's one of those last names where it's like you might start pronouncing it different, so it's harder to make fun of.
Right.
uh, but yeah, so I don't know how he pronounces it, but I'm gonna pronounce it Goober. But yeah, they wanted to make a film from the book, and like honestly, like it makes sense. Like when you read the book, you're like, oh yeah, this would make a really good movie,
Okay.
because it is in letter form, but it's her telling stories and like episodes. So it's even like structured in a way that's like very like it's episodic and it covers a lot
Yeah.
of time. So it's like it's just like primed for this letter is a scene. This letter
Yeah.
is a scene, and you can kind of like take the meat and like the most important ones and like construct it together to make
Right.
a film. So yeah, when I was listening to the book, I was like, oh, okay, that it makes sense why they wanted to make a movie from this.
Right.
Even though typically like a novel made out of letters doesn't like necessarily set itself up great for
Right.
to become a film, but yeah, this one definitely did. But yeah, so she consulted with some friends and decided that working with Hollywood was necessary for improving Black representation,
It's
which makes
ironic.
makes sense
Yeah.
because it's the mid '80s and there just wasn't a lot of representation. Um, unfortunately, there was like a bigger boom of like Black actors in the '70s,
Hmm.
starting to be in movies, and that was kind of like the boom of like black exploitation films, and so the, it was kind of a growing thing, um, but yeah, it wasn't great
Yeah.
in the mid '80s. It's
I
better
think
now. It still has room for improvement, but definitely much
right.
better.
Right. I think this was one of the first ones that was so big as
Mhm.
in regards to the cast. You know,
Yeah,
like there was so many African American people
yeah,
part of this movie and not really anybody else, you know. So
hmm
I can see how that was a big deal to happen,
yeah,
but I can also see how it may have been hard to make that happen in
yeah,
Hollywood at that time. So it was
yes,
kind of like a lot riding on this movie,
yeah,
and we saw some of the fallout from that too.
yes, yeah, and we'll definitely like touch on all that. But yeah, it was it was one of the first, if not like, I I don't wanna say I don't wanna say it was the first, because 'cause I'm sure there might have been some others, but it's definitely, like, one of the first, like, big Hollywood productions. Because this is I
Hmm.
mean, it's a Spielberg film. It's, a pretty decent sized budget for, a period drama like this.
Hmm.
Like, it's a big Hollywood prestige film, like, uh, it's not just, some indie film,
Right.
it's a big thing. You've got Steven Spielberg, um, on the, on the poster. So
Right.
it's a big deal, and it was probably one of the first that had an all black cast,
Hmm.
um, for a movie like that, which is a big deal. And that's partly, I would say, because of Alice Walker, um, and her involvement. She did end up ceding the rights, but she had stipulations. Some of those included a guaranteed consulting role on the film, the right to review casting decisions. So that was a big part. She was also adamant that the actors not be major stars, but talents in the making, which we do see. Um,
I appreciate that.
and then her other big stipulation was that half of the production team, so that's not the actors, that's just like crew.
Crew. Yeah.
Um, so half the production team had to be people of color, women, or people from third world populations. Um, and so all of this really honestly is just like sort of revolutionary for a Hollywood film. So, this was a big deal for,
Yeah.
first of all, for this novel to be made into a movie, and then also like what stipulations Walker put on it, to make it, to help, to start like taking steps toward helping representation.
Right. And also, you know, it's a reflection of her work, you
Mhm.
know, so I would imagine she would want to have as much of a hand in it
Right.
as she can, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you don't want your you don't want your hard work, and like, as a writer, I'm sure she's like pouring her soul into this book, and you don't want that ruined by the movie.
Exactly.
uh but yeah, so even with all that, she remained very skeptical. um Spielberg was also concerned to sign on. He kind of he had gotten the book from Kathleen Kennedy, who was a producer.
Hmm.
She was a co-founder of his production company with him. Um, she had given him the book, and he really connected to the characters. Um, loved the characters, and knew that they were going to be making a movie about it. Quincy Jones was brought on early on, and he yeah, Quincy Jones was brought on to do the music early on. So like Goober and Peters had asked him pretty early on to be part of the movie. He was a composer. He already had like 15 Grammys.
Yeah.
One of them was actually for an audiobook version of E.T., which is cool. He loved E.T. And
I didn't know audiobooks were around back then.
yep, I guess. I mean, they were like, I'm sure, like on, I don't know what,
That
what
tape?
yeah, I guess cassette tapes were around in the mid '80s. Or there's another like thing too. I don't remember, but yeah, I'm
Tape
sure it was
track, maybe.
yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I have seen like audiobooks in cassette form, so I guess it was something like that. But yeah, he also, so they brought him on to do the music, but he became the like main producer for the movie early on.
hmm
So Goober and Peters ended up just being like executive producers. He he I have this quote from him. He said, Alice Walker wanted me involved in the production. She trusted my creative input. So I asked Goober to let me run the whole thing, and I ran straight to Spielberg. Everybody thought I was nuts. And so basically he's like, well, I'm doing the music. Alice Walker wants me more involved, so just let me produce it, basically. And
Yeah.
so he became the producer, and like really wanted Spielberg. Like he only wanted Spielberg to make this movie. And yeah, Spielberg was concerned. He was like, I don't know, like
Right.
I don't know a whole lot about the conditions of Black people in the US. I
Right.
love these characters and everything. And what's funny to me is so in the interviews, Spielberg and Quincy both talk about how when he was like not sure about it, Quincy Jones basically told him, well, you didn't have to be an alien to make E.T. Um,
Yeah.
and then that was like what in the interviews it seems like Spielberg's like, and I was like, okay, yeah, I'll do it. And I was just thinking, wait, that's that's not the same thing at all, but okay.
Right. It got him in the door at least.
Yeah. It worked for Spielberg, I guess, but yeah, I was like, I mean, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but hey, whatever works, But also Alice Walker like wanted to interview whoever they had direct it. So Spielberg actually had to go interview with Walker and like sell
Yeah.
himself for the
Right.
movie, which he talked about like I hadn't done that in like a decade.
Yeah.
Which must have been strange for him. Like she like held all the power in that
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah.
Which is flipping the script for Spielberg, who, like we said, was like at the top of his game at this point.
Right.
Yeah, so I think that says a lot too. What I thought was really cool was that when Spielberg did finally accept the directing position, he reduced his salary to the Directors Guild of America minimum, which was $40,000.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, so he like took the minimum that he could take, because obviously like the DGA, like they have like when you're a member, they have stipulations that like kind of it's kind of like a union in a way. Like you have
Right.
like protections as a director from the industry. So that's one of like the minimum for a member of the DGA is $40,000. So he took the absolute minimum he could, which I thought was really cool. I think I had seen somewhere his like typical salary was like 15 million or something.
Wow. At that
So
time.
that's a big
Wow.
difference.
Yeah, that's a big difference. And he had a kid on the way, so.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, so now like Steven Spielberg was not hurting for money.
Right. Right.
So, it's probably not as big of a deal as like, me taking that pay cut.
Right.
But yeah, it is like it is very like a sign of respect for sure, like at the least, to do
Absolutely.
that for sure. He wanted Alice Walker to write a script. She wasn't that enthusiastic about it. She said she doesn't like to like return to her work once she's done with it, which makes sense. But she did write an early script. She actually called her script "Watch for Me in the Sunset," which I thought was a cool, sort of different. I think it's a line in the book or the movie. That line, "Watch for Me in the Sunset," I think is like maybe something Nettie says to
I think Nettie did say
yeah,
something like that. Yeah.
to Celie in her letters. But yeah, so she wrote it. She didn't think it was that great. Spielberg really loved like parts of it, he said. But in the end, she was like, she wouldn't let him use her script. She was like, no, you need to bring on like a writer, and I don't want you to
Yeah.
use my script.
Yeah.
And so he ends up bringing on a guy named Menno Meyers, who had done some writing for him on his Amazing Stories project, which was a TV series that he produced. And Menno wrote a couple of episodes that he directed himself, and I think he wrote some other episodes for other directors too.
Okay.
So this was his first. He had worked on that TV series, but this was his first feature film screenplay. So
No pressure.
yeah, so no pressure. And then on top of that, you're adapting like this Pulitzer Prize winning novel. I think Mayes is like he was maybe Dutch or something like that. But yeah, still like a European white guy adapting a script of a black woman about the Black rural South in the early
Right.
1900s. So he was concerned, like understandably, about getting
Yeah.
Walker's approval on it, and
That's fair.
and I read that he actually got like ill when she okayed the first draft. Like I guess he had been so stressed about it that
Yeah.
when he finally had the relief of like her okaying it, he like, I don't know. It just said he got ill. I don't know what that means, but I don't even know if that means like he got a bad cold or if he puked or what. But um, but yeah, so he was very relieved, obviously, and she did go in and work with him on like the dialogue and vocabulary and stuff for the script. So she did give some like pretty strong input
Yeah.
on the final product. But yeah, they did. Spielberg thought audiences weren't ready for some of the more like explicit erotic moments, which are in the book.
Yeah.
And then he also just thought like he wasn't the right person to direct those, and
Yeah.
like took a more poetic route in the way they wrote those and filmed them. And I think honestly, like, we'll talk more about that stuff later on, but honestly, like him saying like he's not the right person to direct it is probably pretty true. Like that's just not like Spielberg's MO.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that makes sense to me. It's like I'm not really the guy. If I'm the director, like that's not really my thing. I don't really do those.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. And it's probably also like to avoid, he was afraid of it like getting an R rating if you have too much of that stuff.
Right.
And he generally tried to avoid that in those days. I don't think he had put out an R movie yet. Even though some of his stuff like Jaws probably would have been, if that
Right.
rating was actually like he did avoid the R rating by taking out a little bit of like detached leg bouncing around on the bottom of the sea. That's
I'm
like,
always curious
yeah,
as to what the limit is.
yeah.
Like, what's the
It's so
threshold?
funny because like in Jaws, that is still in the movie, but apparently it was a longer like staying on that like detached leg bouncing around, and they were like, well, if you shorten this, then you can get the PG rating, and so he
Wow.
just shortened it. But yeah, so yeah, that's probably part of it too, is like obviously, like, you're gonna get a wider audience with a PG-13 than with R. So, but yeah, he some of the final stuff with getting the film going, he had to get a cinematographer, obviously. So he called in the director of photography, Gordon Willis, who had done work on The Godfather Part 1 and 2. So obviously had a kind of a specialty for creating rich atmospheres with those movies. And so he was a part of it early on. They actually did some test shooting in black and white because Spielberg was considering shooting this in black and white. And then decided that it would be really strange for a movie called The Color Purple to be filmed in black and white. And so kind of scrapped that idea.
Good call to scrap that, because if I'm going to the movies at that point in time, that's going to be the first thing I'm saying. Like, why is it in black and white and it's called The Color Purple? Like, what is this?
Yes, exactly. It would have been ironic, I guess. But yeah, good call. Good call on Spielberg to kind of scrap that idea. He but Gordon Willis actually didn't end up being the DP for it. He brought on Alan Daviau, who had worked with him on E.T. And had also done his very early short film Amblin, which kind of helped him break into the filmmaking, like break into Hollywood, basically. And then Reuben Cannon did the casting for this movie, which hats off to Mr. Cannon. Great job. He actually had written a letter to Quincy Jones wanting to be part of the production, but got a call asking him to like be the casting director before he even sent the letter. So.
That's
so I loved when he was telling that story. I was like, oh, that's awesome. Yeah. But yeah, so just a quick, we've talked a little bit about the crew. Quincy Jones produced it. Kathleen Kennedy and Frank Marshall, who were in Spielberg's kind of they're co-producers with him on a lot of stuff in this time period with Amblin Entertainment, his production company. So they were producers also, but I'm pretty sure Quincy Jones was like the head honcho as far as producing goes. Obviously, Alice Walker has the original story with the screenplay by Menno Meyjes that we talked about. Meyjes went on to work on Empire of the Sun with him too, which was his next movie. So some extra collaboration. Frank Marshall also did some second unit directing in Kenya. So we have some location shots from Africa that Frank Marshall directed. We talked about Alan Daviau, who was we talked about. He was E.T. He also was his cinematographer for the Twilight Zone movie for his segment, and then he too went on to work with him in Empire of the Sun. So
it's crazy because on set, you get close to all these people you're working with, like the actors, the crew, and after it's done, you're like, okay, what did we work on together next?
Yes.
You have this bond, and you're like, let's keep this whole thing going.
Oh yeah, and doing this series, like I've seen a lot of that with the directors I've covered, is like they're like very strong collaborations with different like members of their crews. With a career as long as Spielberg's, you kind of have like, I guess, like seasons of collaborations with people for the most part. But so this is kind of, I guess, a season of Menno Meyjes and Alan Daviau. But yeah, Michael Kahn, who's his editor, actually was his editor on every movie in his career, starting with I don't remember what he first edited. I think it was Close Encounters. But everything other than E.T. and The Fabelmans, Michael Kahn has been Spielberg's editor. So
nice.
Quincy Jones obviously did the music, and Reuben Cannon directed. I did want to point out some of the other crew we haven't really talked about. J. Michael Riva did the kind of production design, art direction. Really great stuff, I think, that he did. That we'll probably touch on in just a bit. He had worked on The Goonies, which was a Steven Spielberg story and production as well. There's a few Goonies people here. Willie Burton, the sound guy, also from Goonies. And then Richard L. Anderson on sound, also worked with Goonies and Gremlins, which Spielberg produced, and Raiders of the Lost Ark too. So
when you have your people, you have your people.
Yep. Matt Sweeney was the other guy from Goonies, the special effects guy. And then Robert Welsh was the set decorator, which, I think the production design and set decoration for this is really good.
I agree.
Yeah. And so, and then Aggie Gerard Rogers on costumes. Costumes, I think, are great too. You always get some recognition when you do a period piece, for costumes.
So something cool about this. So she was not a person of color,
right?
For this. So listening to her, she was mentioning how she felt like she was in a weird spot,
Yeah.
But it was very cool because I didn't realize for these period pieces what they have to do, so they would go ahead to museums and rent old clothes and stuff and just make a copy of it.
Yeah.
And she was explaining how what those people wore in that day, how men and women's body has changed so much. Like Danny Glover couldn't wear any of what they would wear at that point in time. So I thought that was really cool.
Yeah.
And then how they had to adjust throughout the time of the movie.
Yeah, it's wild, like how she talked about like how body structures change over generations.
Yeah.
And so like those early 1900s, like those clothes just wouldn't fit us. Like even if they were the right, like quote unquote size, like the body structure was just different.
Right.
And I guess like today we wear like looser stuff, looser fitting stuff a lot. So that might be different like for the future. But definitely back then everything was a lot more like fitted. I think that's part of it too. Like if you think about like clothes back then were a lot of clothes were made, I guess you would say made to order, but like, your mom or your grandma or your wife or, whoever was making a lot of the clothes you wear. So it was like made for your specific size and body type. So that might have something to do with it too. I don't know. That was like super. I had never heard that before. So it was definitely interesting. But I think it's cool that they get like clothes from museums and like just kind of like make copies of them basically.
Right.
Very cool.
And just also, dealing with the array of skin tones on that set.
Yes.
Dealing with African American people, but different shades.
Yeah, different shades.
Finding clothes.
A few white people.
To complement, their skin tone and everything. So
I mean, you really like have like a full range of skin tones in this movie, which is really cool.
Yeah.
And that's a big thing. And we'll definitely hit on in just a bit the work the cinematography team did too, which I thought was really awesome. But before we get into that, let's talk a little through the cast.
Hi. Quick reminder that you can be a huge help to the production of this show. If you visit establishingshotpod.com/donate, you'll find out how to join the Establishing Shot family through some giving tiers starting as low as $5 a month. You heard that right, only $5 a month. And not only will you be helping me keep the show going, but you'll also get some perks yourself, like early and ad-free episodes, bonus episodes, access to a Discord server where we can chat it up about the show and movies in general, and more. Might even let you choose a movie for me to review for the show. Check out that link in the show notes to learn more. Back to the show.
We've talked about it's the vast majority of actors are Black actors, which was and kind of still is for a Hollywood film, a big Hollywood film. I mean, we have more of those now than we used to, but it's still like not super often. And so it's a big deal. But yeah, so we mentioned earlier how like a lot of these are really all of these people are not major stars. They're kind of like up and coming talents. And so Whoopi Goldberg plays Celie. And this was really her first like film. When you see the opening credits and it says introducing Whoopi Goldberg.
Yeah.
I think she
But
was
she was just doing stand up at that point.
Mhm.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, I mean, she was doing comedy. I want to say she was in another movie the same year, but it was like, it's one of those things where it's like, okay, but like, did this even have like a release? Like
Right.
did people see this movie? It was one of those kind of things. And so I was like, that doesn't really count. Like, you know, you're in a small movie that nobody sees. This is really your first movie, you know?
Right.
But yeah, she got her big start with, like you were saying, doing comedy. She had a one-woman show called The Spook Show in 1983 that kind of blew up, and it actually got adapted for Broadway later on. But yeah, she discovered The Color Purple after hearing Alice Walker read it on the radio. That was cool, and she heard it, and she actually mailed her resume to Alice Walker asking for a role in the movie. And Walker got her letter and actually wrote her back. And she had actually seen her perform before, so she wrote her back and told her that, and passed her name on to Spielberg, and kind of was like, hey, she might be like perfect for Celie. And so
that's incredible.
Yeah. So take notes, Christian. Like if you hear about a movie being made and you're like, oh, I'd love to be in that, just like write someone a letter.
Yeah, start writing letters. Yeah. Bring that back.
Yep. Pull a Whoopi and just write a personal letter to a big person in the production. Yeah. So Spielberg brings her in for an audition, and he actually had her for her audition perform some of her show. I don't, or at least some of it. It might have been all of it. I don't know how long it was, but yeah. So she thought she was just going to be like doing some of her show for like, you know, a few people, but there was like 40 people there when she showed up, and including so Quincy Jones had, you know, he had done a lot of like music work, and he had worked with Michael Jackson. They were good friends, and so Michael Jackson was actually there.
Yeah.
Alice Walker herself, and Spielberg and Quincy. So I mean, you've got like a bunch of people and some big names that you're performing in front of. But so yeah, she does that for her audition, which is wild. Like, can you imagine like this is really your first big film, and you're going to be like auditioning for the lead role, and like Michael Jackson is there, like watching you.
Yeah, it's like, hey, tell us some jokes that have nothing to do with this role.
Yes. I heard somewhere that she had a bit about E.T., where instead of landing in like suburbia, he lands like in the hood, and ends up being like a pimp and stuff, and and like someone got her to do that bit for that audition. I don't know if there's any truth to that, but she did have that bit at some point, which I think is really funny.
That is funny, and I'm imagining her as Celie doing that.
Yeah,
it's hard to connect.
Yeah, it is. But yeah, Spielberg really loved her. She wanted to be Sophia, but Spielberg told her that he like sensed the strength and fighting spirit of Celie in her. And I actually at one point in one of the interviews he said she was the only Celie, which you see a lot with Spielberg. Like he'll like have someone audition, or he'll have like sometimes he'll have like a bunch of people audition, but there'll be one standout, and he'll be like, no, this is the one. This is the only person that can do it. which is always cool. But yeah, that's that's Whoopi, which I mean, just like incredible job with this movie. Like
Yeah,
it's your first
he was
movie, like just really,
kno-
really good.
knocked it out the park.
Yeah,
It was a very captivating performance.
yeah,
Just watching her because I've seen her in more comedic role like
hmm
Sister Act,
right,
which I love that movie. But seeing her in this one was like,
yeah,
wow.
yeah, like some range. Because I mean, she's for one, like it's a period piece, so like your dialogue is like not natural, um, to like how you would speak today, to like how
Right.
she was speaking in 1985, like is very different than the way these characters are speaking in the early 1900s, and so that's that's one obstacle. And then it's just like it's your first movie, like you're working with like the Hollywood director. Um,
hmm
I did kind of read about how like Spielberg like really really coached her up, and like and
Yeah.
she even said like in one interview that like she hasn't worked with any director of his caliber since that movie.
Wow.
Like she was just so very appreciative of like the attention she gave him, like that he gave her,
Yeah.
and working with her. So that was cool to hear. Her just like appreciation of him. And I mean, like, what a way to kick off your career to be like the star of a Spielberg movie.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like you can conquer the world at that
Yeah.
point.
Yeah. I mean, basically you're good to go at that point,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like you don't even
Right.
have to do anything else.
Exactly.
I guess unless you want to like make a living. But uh, but yeah, I thought she was incredible. I think I think it. We'll talk about the tone of the movie a little later. I think she is a little different than she comes across a little bit differently than she did when I listened to the book.
Okay.
Um, but that's not really like on Whoopi. That's more just like in the way she was like written and directed, I think. Um, but yeah, she's in the book. The Seeley character like has a very slow transformation, which is true of the character in the movie too. Like there's kind of a
hmm
slow like change over time of her character, but in the book she's way more like um she's just seen obviously like this is the way I imagined her. She just seemed way more like passive and kind of I just imagined her much more blank faced and like
Okay.
just like um very few like emotions experienced, and then like slowly over time like starting to actually like experience real emotions and stuff. And in the
Right.
movie she comes across more like bashful, and like shy, I guess,
Okay.
um and like kind of just grows more confident out of like bashfulness, which is cool. It's just like different than how I felt about the book, how
Yeah.
she was in the book. um
Given what you went through as a teenager.
Yeah, it's kind of like in the book you kind of feel like she's just you start off with her and she's like already defeated.
Right.
Um
Right.
whereas in the movie she feels more just kind of like shy and
hmm
bashful, and she doesn't really feel like defeated, like
Yeah. Okay.
if that makes sense.
Yeah. I'm tracking with you.
Yeah. Uh but again, that's just kind of like my personal like feel of the way the book seemed, and
hmm
it's kind I guess it's kind of like a creative like interpretation of like, okay, how do you portray this on screen? So maybe that is the best way to portray that on screen. I don't know. Um, but yeah, but again, like that's not really like on Whoopi. Like she like not like you said, like knocks it out of the park.
Right.
Um,
Right.
so but yeah, Oprah is the next cast member we should talk about playing
yeah.
Sophia. Um, and it's I mean, so she's obviously like in the movie less often than Seeley. It's Seeley's
hmm
movie, but I don't know, like I almost want to say like Oprah like outperforms this Whoopi S. Seeley. I mean, she's like
The scene stealer.
she is
She was my favorite character.
yeah. I mean, she like every time she's on screen, it's like whoa, you know.
What's about to happen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And which talking about the new musical adaptation, the it's kind of the same thing with the actress for that plays Sophia in that.
What's Taraji, the Sophia character?
No, Taraji plays Shug. Daniel
Okay.
Brooks is the one who plays Sophia, and she is like incredible. She did get a nomination for supporting actress, and I was
Okay.
like, okay, yeah, that's well deserved.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Oprah at this time was not the Oprah we know now. She was just doing a morning show in Chicago called AM Chicago. So she wasn't like so obviously like she's on TV, like people probably like in Chicago know who she is.
Yeah.
But like she's not like a nationally recognized like TV personality at this point.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that's like when you're watching this in hindsight, you kind of have to like remind yourself of, because
Yeah.
when we hear Oprah, like it's one of those like you don't need a last name. She's Oprah.
Yeah.
Like you don't need to hear Beyonce Knowles. She's Beyonce. You don't need to hear Oprah
Right.
Winfrey. She's Oprah. You know. So.
But at this point,
Yeah.
a lot of people like, who is this?
Yeah. Exactly.
Probably.
Yeah. So yeah, she's not a big name at this point. But she was a huge fan of the book, The Color Purple. She had read it, and she had heard like a movie was in the works. The quote that I pulled from her interview was, "I've never wanted anything more in life before or after than to be in The Color Purple." So this is like the peak of her life, is being in this movie. So Quincy Jones is in Chicago, and he sees her on TV. He happens to like, I think in his hotel or something, just happens to see her on the TV, and he's like, "Oh man, this woman needs to be Sophia in our movie." And
Crazy.
yeah. So yeah, she gets a call for an audition for a movie called Moon Song, which was the working title of the movie. And she knows that the Color Purple is like in production. But there's like, it's for this movie Moon Song. She's like, "It's not for the Color Purple." And they're like, no, it's for this movie called Moon Song. And very secretive, I guess. And so, but then she reads the audition script and she's like, "Oh, this is the Color Purple."
Yeah, because you need a book.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so she auditions, and then it's like, I want to say, I remember her when she was telling the story, it was like maybe a month. It had been like a month or maybe even more than that. I can't remember.
Yeah.
But
I heard it was, she mentioned it was about 2 months.
Okay, 2 months, yeah.
She was at this health farm, which I never even heard of a health farm.
Yeah, I didn't know what that was either.
Yeah, and she's like getting used to the fact that, hey, I probably didn't get it.
She's finally coming to terms with it.
Yeah. It's like, hey, Steven Spielberg's also just calling you.
Yeah.
And they're like, what did he say? Like, you had better not lose like 1 pound.
Yeah, they called her. Well, I guess so. It's like 1985, so like people aren't like walking around really with cell phones, and so I guess at this point it's like they called her office. She wasn't there. They were like, "Oh, she's at this health farm or whatever," and so they call there, and the staff members are like, "Hey, you have a phone call," kind of thing. And so they knew she was at this health place, and they basically were like, "Hey, what are you doing like at this health place?" They were like, "If you lose 1 pound, like you could lose the part." Because Sophia's supposed to be a heavier set woman. And so she was like, "So I immediately left and went straight to Dairy Queen." And I was like, "Oh, that's epic."
Yeah. I love her character because she starts off with a bang. Like her first scene, it's just like you see her walking with
Mm-hmm.
with authority.
Yes.
And she bursts into the room, and just boom, right off the bat.
Yep. She's rolling her eyes at Mister and like mean mugging him. It's like
Yeah.
drinking his lemonade.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh man. But yeah, she's a firecracker in the movie. Really incredible. And what's crazy is when you hear her talk about it, she was like terrified of like not being up to the task. But like she just again and again just like not like destroys her scenes.
Yeah.
So you I guess you probably heard in the interview how on the day that she did the monologue in the cornfield, the whole like the all my
All
life
my
I had
life
to
I
fight,
had to fight.
where
Yeah.
she's like ripping into Celie for telling Harpo to beat her.
Mhm.
So she showed up early and she was just like ready to do it, and she did it. She did that monologue against nothing. Like
Yeah.
there wasn't an actor, like Whoopi wasn't there or anything. She just did that monologue,
Yeah.
which is incredible.
That's how dialed in she had to be,
Yes.
and she probably knew like, hey, this is my moment of the
Mhm.
movie, and
Yeah.
so she came ready and like, hey, I don't even need anybody.
Yeah.
Um,
She must have showed up
and
just like, I better get it out now. Like,
yeah,
oh man.
those are the type of scenes you it's hard to sleep at night because you're like,
Yeah.
hey, this is it. I have to bring it. And I've been part of situations to where the actor or actress, is really in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And the person they're talking to, you're not going to see that person, but just to kind of help them, that person on the other side stands there just to kind of give them something, and
Yeah.
the fact that she didn't need that, she was just so like in it for like, hey, I don't need anybody.
Yeah. Incredible.
It's remarkable. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess like there's not a whole lot of like Celie talking back to her. Like,
Right. Yeah.
Celie
Yeah.
just has to take it in
Yeah.
that scene. And so I guess like they had to go back and film some shots of Celie to intercut with it. But
Right.
but yeah, I mean like just really incredible. The other like crazy thing is that the dinner table scene, the dinner table monologue she gives towards the end of the movie was really just kind of improv. She and she kind of says that's where she finally like kind of feels like she came into her own acting. She had been like acting kind of out of like fear and being scared of not knowing if she was like capable up to that point. And in that Spielberg kind of talks about how he kind of saw that she had more in her. She just like had something. There was something she just wasn't giving them. And so he just kind of, they were all there getting ready to shoot, and he was just like, tell them how you really feel. And so she just improvs that that whole thing, which I thought was like super well delivered. And Spielberg even told her later on that he knew she was scared, but he just let her stay scared because she was using that emotion, I guess, in her acting. So yeah, that's really cool. I guess that's like, you could say that's kind of rude, but it's acting. I guess you got to use what you can.
Right. It's like the director is like the coach.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Whatever they have to do to get you to perform or whatever.
Yeah, and at this point, Spielberg like has become really good at like being able to work with different actors and even kids. So like he was very used to, at this point, like he's directed enough different kind of people where he knows like what different people need.
Right.
As a director, you've got to be like a student of people kind of. You have to like learn like okay, how do I work with this person? You have to pick up on kind of like their personality and all that,
Right,
and
right,
try to like gauge like, okay, like I can't like be as like assertive with this person. I've got to do this, or this person needs me to be like assertive and tell them exactly what to do, you know?
right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. And I'm sure like you've kind of like experienced some of that, like being on set and seeing like what you need and what different, like this actor needs something different than I do kind of thing. But
Right, right. So there's times where I heard this one acting coach say, and he directed a TV show, and he said his favorite actors to work with are the ones that are coachable,
yeah,
who come in and are just like willing to do whatever, say whatever, however you want it,
yeah, yeah,
who don't come in saying like, hey, I'm going to do it like this,
yeah, yeah,
I think my character is this. And it's like, no, I want your character to be this. And
yeah,
he said those are the easier actors to work with
yeah.
because, it's a little more moldable. So
Hmm.
his advice was to just be coachable,
Yeah,
and if it comes off and it sucks,
yeah,
everyone's going to know it. And they're like, okay, let's go with your idea, how
yeah,
you want to do
yeah.
it.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and one thing with this movie in particular is that Spielberg kind of tossed out the storyboarding
Hmm.
early on, and like rehearsals too. They had been doing rehearsals and it just like wasn't working. It was kind of like stressing everybody out doing the
Right.
rehearsals, and so he just like scrapped the rehearsals. And so
Hmm.
basically like they're not really working off of storyboards. They're not working off of a bunch of rehearsing. They're just kind of like jumping into these scenes and shooting it. Um
Yeah.
and it's probably partly like I want to say like a little bit of that was probably like Spielberg feeling a little out of his element with both the material and also like just like the culture he was like trying to direct within.
Yeah.
Like, you've got, and then, you've got a cast of people like that are not like
Right.
um, like, so it's just like, it is probably like a really smart thing to just be like, hey, let's cut out the rehearsing. He was relying on the input of the actors for this movie. And so
Hmm.
one of the things that like I'm really starting to appreciate about Spielberg is like if something isn't working, then he just like does a 180 and like
Right.
and changes it. Um
Yeah.
you kind of start seeing that more and more like in his films is like, oh, like when, because a lot of directors, I don't know about a lot, but there are like a good bit of directors that it's like, hey, this is how we're gonna do it, and
Yeah.
maybe it's not working, and you should change it, but you're just like so like set in like, oh, this is
Hmm.
how I want to do it, that you don't change it when you should.
Yeah.
And
Right.
Spielberg's not like that. Like he changes something when it's not working, and so
Which I think is a great approach.
yes, yeah, and especially for this movie, like when you're relying so much on the input of people that are like closer to the material than you are.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
it just makes sense. Like it's just kind of the common sense, smart thing to do, really.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but yeah, going for like more in the cast. Uh, I guess I should mention Willard E. Pugh, who played Harpo. Got the job kind of together with Oprah. I'm sure they kind of auditioned together since they would be
Hmm.
obviously doing a lot of scenes together. You got to kind of figure like, oh, are they going to have chemistry? They're going to
Right.
be able to act well together. So Spielberg gave them the job at the same time. As the story goes, he cried when he told them that they both got the job, and Oprah screamed and
Yeah.
apparently like jumped up and like knocked over a space shuttle model Spielberg had in his office and broke it, which I
Yeah.
thought was like great. And I could like picture Oprah doing it too, because I've seen her
Right,
I've
yeah.
seen her jump up with excitement on TV plenty of
Yeah.
times.
And there's that famous that gif of her,
Yeah.
just like picking and stuff. So
Yep, that too. Yeah, I forgot about that. But yeah, Willard E. Pugh plays Harpo. I don't really you don't really hear a lot about him in the movie or like in interviews or stuff. So, but Danny Glover, on the other hand, you do hear a good bit about in the interviews. Danny Glover playing Mr. What's crazy is like he even wasn't like a major star at this point. When they were filming this Silverado, which was a big movie, Western that he was in,
okay.
Lawrence Kasdan, I think, directed that. Who was a big Hollywood director.
Okay.
That movie had not yet come out when they were filming this, so that it came out earlier in '85 than The Color Purple. So that wasn't out yet. And Lethal Weapon obviously came out in '87,
Yeah.
so that wasn't out yet, which was kind of like a big action blockbuster breakout for him, obviously.
Right.
So even like Danny Glover is not a big star at this point. He's just kind of another name, you know.
He was definitely, when he first popped up on screen, I was like, I don't like him.
Yes.
I was just like, and I've never seen Danny Glover that young.
Yeah.
I think my first memory of Danny Glover was probably the Lethal Weapon movie. Well, no, Angels in the Outfield, probably.
Yeah. That's probably my first two, honestly, because that was like a big movie when we were kids.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
But seeing how he looked, I was like, he's just,
yeah,
I don't like him.
Yeah. He carried it really well.
Yeah.
Which is funny because he seems like a really sweet guy, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, Spielberg had seen him in a movie from '84 called Places in the Heart, which I know nothing about. But Spielberg liked him in it and said that he wanted him to play Mister, and he didn't really want anybody else. Like, I don't even think Danny Glover really auditioned. They just kind of hired him.
Right. And that's a cool spot to be in. Like,
Yeah.
hey, I want you to do this. Like, okay, I'm in.
Yeah, exactly. I loved this quote. I pulled a quote from Glover when he was talking about playing the character that I thought was really good. He said, "I never judged it. That's the worst thing you can do as an actor is judge the character. All you can do as an actor is try to be and try to live inside the character or whatever that is." I thought that was a really cool like quote, just about just insight into playing a character like that for one.
Yeah.
And then probably just acting in general. I don't know if you related to that quote or not as someone.
So when I heard that quote, it makes sense because in order to do the character justice, approaching it that way would allow you to be a little more authentic to that character without bringing your personal beliefs or your personal, mannerisms to it. Because for his character in particular, and I believe Danny Glover is a nice, sweet guy.
Yeah.
He probably instinctively wanted to bring some of that to the character, but it's like, nope, that's not who that character is.
Yeah.
So,
and obviously,
just having some blinders on.
He's not the kind of guy probably that wants to beat up women. And so
exactly.
in the movie you have to beat up women, and it's like you really have to kind of remove yourself altogether to be able to do that. And be convincing doing it, I guess.
Exactly.
Because I guess if you are bringing a lot of not able to turn off your judgment of those actions off, then you're really you could portray guilt or shame on that character as you're acting it, which you can't really do to be convincing, I guess. Yeah, it is very hard. We'll talk probably more about that too. Yeah. Margaret Avery plays Shug Avery. So little same last name there was convenient. But yeah, Reuben Cannon really wanted Tina Turner for the role. But Tina Turner did not want to relive growing up in the South and her abusive relationship with her husband Ike, and
Totally fair.
totally understandable.
Yeah.
So she declined. And Margaret Avery, uh, I had read that she just like pestered Reuben Cannon basically until she got the part. But she had actually worked with Spielberg. He had a TV movie called Something Evil
Okay.
in the early 70s, and she wasn't like a big role in it or anything. She's kind of just like for all intents and purposes like an extra, but she is in the movie like singing in it or
Yeah.
something. And she like reminded Spielberg, and he was like, "Oh, I forgot like about that."
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, so she I thought was great. The songs are actually performed by Tata Vega,
Okay.
who is I guess like a blues singer, or a singer if not a blues singer. I didn't really look that up a whole lot into that, but yeah, so that's like kind of dubbed over her. She's kind of lip syncing for the singing
Yeah.
scenes. But yeah, I thought she does great as Shug Avery.
Yeah. She was a nice addition to the cast.
Yeah.
I really liked her.
Yeah, she like Shug brings a different energy as a character in the story, and I think she did a good job of like bringing a different type of energy to the movie. Because that's like a very like big like a big personality.
Right.
And so especially like she's different like in physical appearance than Shug is described in the book.
Okay.
So Shug feels more physically like big along with her personality. Like maybe not like
Okay.
a Sophia like heavy set woman, but like she just kind of like feels like she's a more like big presence both like in personality and like and just like physically than she, because really like Margaret Avery like she's pretty tiny woman, it seems like,
Yeah.
at least like compared to everybody else on scene. So she really had to bring like a big personality
Yeah. Yeah.
and to like make herself like stand out in her scenes, which I think she does. Like,
Yeah. That character, for me, she was a little mysterious when I was watching the movie because I'm like, okay, who is it? Is this just the one, a singer he likes to go see, and he's just in love with the singer?
right.
Like,
No,
is this
in the book,
someone? Okay.
Yeah.
And so it took a little while. Like, is this just someone he's just a big fan of? But then he shows up at the house.
Yeah.
Like, okay, what's going on
Yeah,
here?
yeah.
So,
Yeah, I didn't even think about that, but yeah, that is kind of how it goes in the movie. Because I had already read the book, so I already knew who Shug was. So yeah, in the movie, that's kind of more of a, I guess you kind of find out as you go
yeah.
who she was for him.
Right.
But yeah, he does kind of mention early on, like when he's getting her out of the cart, like, oh, she's who should have been your mama to Harpo.
Yeah.
But
Right.
it's like kind of a throwaway line that you could like miss or just like, shrug off like as, but yeah, in the book, it's much more apparent who she is, like
Okay.
for Mr. But yeah, I thought Margaret Avery did great. And then just kind of quickly through these other people. This is a hard name to say. Akosua. Akosua. I don't really know. Akosua Busia. I'm more confident in Busia being a correct pronunciation than her first
Right.
name. But she plays Nettie. Reuben Cannon suggested her to audition for Nettie. She was a stage actress at the time, so
Okay.
another kind of up and coming talent.
Yeah.
It's really just everybody. There's not really any big stars in this movie, not yet anyway. But yeah, so she she actually read the novel in one sitting and like begged to be hired, and then went to the audition without having slept the night before, and
What?
got the part. So
And she did great too.
yeah, so I thought she was really good. For Celie, there's two actresses that play her. Desretta Jackson plays the young Celie, but I'm pretty sure for Nettie, Bousquet plays the young
And
and the older
older.
Nettie,
Yeah.
which I didn't even realize watching the movie. I kind of
Oh.
realized that, like, when I was doing my research after, I was like, wait, there's only one actress for Nettie, like, in the cast
Yeah.
list. I was like, oh, she's, I guess, both.
I did think that was interesting.
Yeah.
When she popped up, I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah. So which is, I guess, says something about maybe the costume design and like makeup that, like, I didn't realize, like, it was. I just assumed, I guess, because the actress for Celie was different, that the actress for Nettie was going to be different,
Right.
and so I didn't even think about it. But yeah, she did great, I thought. She's not in the movie a ton, obviously, but yeah, she I thought she did really good. But yeah, one thing I thought was cool was her and Oprah. They both said they were there for every shoot, no matter if they'd been called in or not. They just, like, they were
Right.
on set, they were in it,
Yeah. Yeah.
which you gotta love that commitment, and
Yeah.
it comes out of their love for the story, for the book.
Yeah. And then, like I said, you get close to the people around there,
Yeah.
and you're just like, this is my family for now.
Yeah. Yeah. What Nettie too is interesting. So, like, in the book, you get a lot more of Nettie's story than you do in this. Like, I definitely highly recommend the book. You get, like, so much interesting stuff about her journey to Africa and, like, the things she learns while in Africa. Like, you get a lot of it. Like, basically, like, the last, like, I don't know if it's the last half or the last third of the book. You get basically letters back and forth from Celie to Nettie and Nettie to Celie.
Oh, okay.
And they're not necessarily, like, receiving each other's letter. Well, obviously Celie is getting Nettie's. But I don't know that Nettie is getting hers. Because obviously she doesn't really know where to send them.
Right.
But she stops writing to God and starts writing to Nettie instead, basically. And that's kind of part of her just character development too. But yeah, I definitely recommend that. It's something that, like, it makes sense why that's not necessarily, like, in the movie a ton. Like, you get a little bit of that, just enough to, like, get a feel for what was going on there. But yeah, in the book, it fleshes that out a ton, and it's, like, super interesting. Yeah, because it's basically like, there's she goes with a family, like a black family. They're black missionaries going to Africa to minister to African people, and it's just super interesting, the dynamic there. The perspective is, like, it's just not a perspective I've, like, experienced, obviously, myself. I can't, but not one I've, like, heard a lot about. So that was really cool to read.
Was it so in the movie? It made it seem like Nettie was just gone, because the first thing Celie thought when she read the letter, or what Nettie had said, was like, "Hey, I'm not dead."
Yeah.
In the book, was it written that way to where you're thinking, "Oh, Nettie, she's no longer part of the story and she just pops up," or
Yeah,
was she kind of?
You don't really know in the book. You don't necessarily know why Nettie's not writing back. And Celie kind of talks about how she just kind of assumes, like, she's dead, because Nettie does say, like she does in the movie, that only death could keep her from writing to Celie, or to, from Celie or whatever. And so Celie's like, I guess she's dead because I haven't heard from her. Like, she doesn't ever question, like, oh, Nettie forgot about me. She's just like, I guess she's dead, or something's happened. Like, she doesn't ever, like, doubt Nettie's commitment or whatever, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, you kind of slowly later, like in the movie, how basically like Shug kind of finds out that there's been letters from Nettie coming in. She kind of like she and Celia are close at that point, like they are in the movie, and she tells her, and they do like go and find all the letters and stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, you kind of find out like, oh, Nettie's been writing this whole time later on in the book too.
Okay.
But then once that's the case, you read a bunch of Nettie's letters in the book, and then it starts going back and forth. I guess like once she's kind of caught up with Nettie's letters, then she's like writing letters to Nettie, and then still getting like more letters back from Nettie because she finds out like, oh, they're going to be, coming home, coming back, soon and stuff. So she knows like they're coming and all that in the book, which is a little different than it is in the movie. I don't know. I don't remember if she's like aware that they're coming back in the movie. I can't remember. But yeah, that is like one of the probably biggest differences in the book and the movie is that you don't get a ton of like Nettie's story in the movie.
Okay.
Whereas in the book you get like all of it.
Gotcha.
Yeah. But yeah, other actors like Adolf Caesar plays Old Mister. I think he does good. Ray Don Chong plays Squeak or Mary Agnes, and she's a bigger character in the book too. Doesn't really have much of a role at all here.
Right.
So other people, Dana Ivey plays Miss Millie. Leonard Jackson plays her pa. The guy you find out is actually her stepdad, not her real dad.
That was a big plot twist.
Yes.
Like,
It's the same thing in the book. She actually finds out from a letter from Nettie. Nettie finds out because of just some things that the pastor that she's with tells her about knowing like some people in her family, and she realizes, oh, that's not my dad. Like, yeah, big plot twist. Bennett Guillory plays Grady, who is Shug's husband later on in the movie, and John Patton Jr. plays the preacher, the Shug's dad, I think. He's not really ever named. And then Lawrence Fishburne is actually in this movie, and I didn't even realize that was him.
Oh, really?
I probably just honestly I wasn't paying a lot of attention to that character. He plays Swain, who's like just kind of like a side character you don't really see a whole lot of. He's Harpo's friend that plays the guitar and stuff, but yeah, so I was like, when I realized like that was Lawrence Fishburne, I was like, oh wow, like totally like missed that while I was watching the movie.
Yeah, it was cool to see him. I was like, oh, because I wasn't expecting it. I was like, oh, Lawrence Fishburne is here. Okay.
Yeah, but very small role. He was in Apocalypse Now actually in '79 and hadn't really like done a whole lot since then. And then does this movie, and I guess like his career probably picked up a little bit after this, I would think.
Okay. I remember seeing an old movie when he was a kid. Is that what that movie was called?
Yeah, he was in some stuff early on, and then Apocalypse Now was like a big movie he was in. I mean, Apocalypse Now is a big movie, obviously, but yeah, between that '79 and this is '85, like he wasn't really in. He was in a few things, but it's like nothing recognizable sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. They did also bring on some renowned musicians, Sonny Terry, who was a blues harmonica player, Greg Gaines, a keyboard player, and Roy Gaines, a guitarist. I don't really recognize any of those, but if you're listening and you recognize those names, maybe that's a fun fact for you. Like, oh yeah, Sonny Terry. I love that guy.
Yeah.
I wish I knew who he was. to be honest, but I don't. Um, I like a good blues harmonica, I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
What's not to like?
People are probably like, "How do you not know who
I know.
Sonny Terry is?"
People are like, "What? You don't know Sonny Terry?" No, I do not. I'm sorry. I apologize. Um, but yeah, let's dig into the production. We spent enough time talking about those actors. Um, uh, yeah, so this was shot in the summer of 1985. Um, they started off with 3 weeks shooting the interiors on sets built at Universal Studios. Spielberg had actually moved the production there because he was expecting a baby, as you mentioned
Mhm.
earlier, with his wife at the time, Amy Irving. So, yeah, they were expecting their first child, which is cool. So they shot at Universal for about 3 weeks, and then they started location shooting. They had hoped for locations in Georgia, but couldn't find any suitable, which I
Mhm.
find hard to believe because I feel like there's probably a lot of great locations in Georgia, but they were looking for like very specific, like a plantation with a house with plenty of like, they were looking for something very specific.
Yeah,
From what I,
landlocked. That's how
yeah,
they were looking for that.
yeah. So yeah, they eventually found something in North Carolina. Um, it was in some like rural towns, kind of east of Charlotte, North Carolina. So they found this the city of Marshville, where they filmed a lot of like the streets and town stuff.
Hmm.
And then they found this former cotton plantation in the vicinity of Wadesboro, North Carolina, which is kind of like the main location we get for um, the Mr. and Seeley's house, and the land around that, and
Yeah.
you get kind of like Harpo's bar, and the um, Seeley's house is out there, and the church too is actually, I don't think I put that um in my production design notes. But the church was actually like gonna be, it was a local church that was about to be demoed, and
Oh wow.
so they like stopped the demolition, and um like asked if they could have it, and they're like, yeah. So they basically like deconstructed the church and reconstructed it on that property that they were shooting on, for the church scenes, which is,
A movie
yeah,
magic.
movie magic.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so they, on that cotton plantation, they aged a house. There was a house there that they used that was like Mr. and Seeley's house was the one that was already
Mhm.
there. They did some like aging on it, um, which I uh, it's one of those things where it's like you could probably spend hours like just listening to the people that worked on a film talk about like all the things they did.
Oh yeah.
But unfortunately, there was only like a few like 20 something minute special features on the on the Blu-ray. So,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
but they did age the house. They planted some tobacco and sunflowers around it, which you see in the movie. And then they actually built Harpo's bar and Seeley's house from scratch, which I'm always like super impressed. Like when I'm doing this research for these movies, and they're like, "Yeah, we just built this house from scratch." It's like,
Hmm.
that's crazy. Like you
Yeah.
just like built a house.
Yeah.
But they do. They just do that. They'll build a house. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
all right.
It's very impressive what those set designers can do and what they're capable of.
Yes.
It's it's very impressive.
Yes, absolutely. Um, yeah, it's yeah, they did that. They brought in one, obviously, if you're gonna have a movie set in Georgia, you've got to get some red dirt. Um,
Mm.
get some of that Georgia red clay in your movie. So they brought in some red dirt for like the roads of the town, um, and that sort of thing. I guess probably like the roads that they kind of made on the plantation to lead up to the house.
Yeah.
Um, one of the things they did was they planted a field of purple flowers, for the for very like important part of the movie, and I think so when I was watching the thing, what I remember is Spielberg saying they had gotten like, all these flowers and it said purple flowers, but then like when you actually like look at the picture, they're like kind of more pinkish.
Yeah.
And so they planted all these flowers and then they grew, and sure enough, they were like kind of too pink instead of like more
Yeah.
purple.
Yeah.
Which is like, well, we planted it now. I guess we've got to use these. So they
Yeah.
did do some like artificial dyeing of some of the flowers that were going to be like more close up to the camera.
Right.
But yeah,
When I was watching it, and maybe I was catching more of the ones they wanted us to see, but I
Yeah.
thought they were purple.
yeah. It wasn't until I was watching the like the special features and they were talking about it and showing like the, oftentimes in special features they'll like show what they're talking about as they're talking
Yeah.
about it, and I was like, oh yeah, a lot of those flowers are kind of
So more pink.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now that they're saying that. But in the movie, I guess like your brain is just telling you, oh, of course these are purple flowers because
Right.
they're talking
The
about them
name-
being purple and the movie's called The Color Purple. So your brain is
Right.
just like programmed to think you're looking at purple. So yeah,
Yeah.
it worked for them. But yeah, towards the end of the movie, they removed the flowers and then they used like a bunch of Epsom salt and white flock material for snow for the winter scenes. They had like reverse black vacuums to blow it all around, and it's always funny.
That was a lot of it.
Yeah, it's a lot of it. They had enough Epsom salt where they were able to like build snowballs and snowmen with it, which is funny. But yeah, it's always funny to me too. Like the temperature is actually like around 90 degrees when they're filming these winter scenes.
And have these big coats on and everything.
Yeah, it's got to be miserable. But yeah. Some other production stuff. J. Michael Riva, the production designer, was not happy with the letter design, so he got one of the other guys to basically they like wrote most of those like letters and like envelopes and stuff themselves, and then they like dyed them with this like solution and had it like hanging all over. They made it seem like they had it hanging like all over the break room because they talked about how like Spielberg like walks in and he's like looking around and they're like, it's drying, we're like working on these letters, and Spielberg's like, okay, it looks great, and like walks out.
I'm very curious as to what they looked like before and what he didn't like about them.
They didn't really mention that. But yeah, it's something we'll never know. We'll never get a peek behind that curtain, I guess.
You get so detailed on those sets,
Those production people are like, they think of stuff like you would never think of, but it adds a lot to the texture of the movie. Like, when you're watching, like, you don't think about like, oh, these letters look great. But like in hindsight, you're like, oh yeah, they did look great. I'm glad they like put that much detail into them,
Yeah.
The only other thing I had for production was they like dug a hole for at the end of the movie where like in the distance is like Nettie and her kids and stuff, and they have those like veils like blowing in the wind. They had like dug a hole in front of them and put these fans in it to like blow up the stuff, which I guess sort of falls into visual effects. There's not a whole lot as far as visual effects goes in this movie,
Right.
Maybe Harpo falling through the roof is some visual effects. But
I was curious as to how they pulled that off at that time. Because
that's definitely a stuntman for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely not Willard E. Pugh falling through the roof. There, definitely a stuntman. But yeah, for sure.
They were really determined about that last scene with the fans.
Yes.
I read that they stopped production to go actually pick up an extra fan because one of them broke.
Oh yeah.
We have to do this scene with it. I'm like, oh wow, okay.
Yeah. It was it's all those small details, man. You got to get them all exactly right,
Yeah.
But yeah, one of the cool things about this, so this is something we'll kind of flesh out more, but this is really like Spielberg's first quote unquote like adult film, I guess, in that like it's a kind of a prestige drama.
Yeah.
He hasn't done a lot of that, really any of it up to this point. And so it's his first quote unquote adult film, and then two, like he sees himself as like kind of truly becoming an adult with his first child on the way. And what's crazy is they were so early on in the shooting, they're doing the birth scene, at the beginning of the movie. And just when they're getting into that, starting to shoot that, Spielberg gets a call that his son is being born. And so he
Right.
has to like leave set, has Frank Marshall finish that scene for him. And he goes and his son Max is born. As they're shooting the birth scene in the movie,
Yeah.
which is awesome, and ironic for sure. But yeah, Spielberg too, like recorded Max crying at some point, and so the baby crying you hear in the movie is actually Spielberg's son, which is really cool.
Yeah, that is cool. I wonder if he got a paycheck for that.
Yeah, pay Max for his for the rights to use his cry.
Right. Yeah.
You set up the college fund with that.
Yeah, exactly. Spielberg playing chess.
Yeah, for sure. Financial chess, baby. Yeah, and one of the things I thought was funny is that a critique of the movie was that it was just like for a Spielberg move for an Oscar bid, but really, like if you think about his maturing, like he's a big Hollywood director, and you're really like, if you're a big Hollywood director, you're either directing like big action and blockbuster kind of stuff, adventure and
Yeah.
action stuff, or you're directing like kind of like prestige drama films. And that's what this is. So it's really like just the natural progression for Spielberg to
Right.
finally like direct a movie like this.
Yeah.
So I thought that was an interesting thing to think about too. But yeah, he had some difficult scenes to shoot in this movie, to say the least. The one that they talk about the most in the special features is the Celie and Nettie getting separated.
Yeah.
And yeah, so Spielberg had to like let them take breaks between takes.
Yeah.
And Bousquet said that Spielberg, like the way he directed her and the actress that played young Celie, was like, don't let Mr. separate you, like by any means. Like,
Yeah.
and so like when they're going through that scene, like you got to remember that they didn't do like a lot of rehearsing, and they're just kind of
Right.
like improvising a lot of this stuff. And so the result you get is really them just like actually trying to not let him separate. So they're holding on to each other and holding the pole.
Right.
And Glover actually comes up and like actually beats on her hands on that pole.
When I saw that part, I was like, is he really doing that?
Yeah,
Because
he
that's
was.
like, wow,
Yeah.
so the headspace he had to be in.
Yeah, you gotta like
again,
turn off.
Play that character. Yeah.
Yeah, and they talk about how it was really the hardest on him to film that scene, and he actually like was like shaking after they finished filming it. Which I can only imagine that like that's hard.
I remember my first time on a set, and we were doing this scene with my scene partner, and it was an emotionally charged scene. And they yell cut and stuff like that, and I'm like, okay, cool. And the other actress, she's like on the sofa, like I think she was having a panic attack, but she was just like so into it.
Yeah.
And the director was like, hey, it's okay. She's just, very into it.
Yeah.
Just let her kind of come down a little bit. I was like, wow, this is crazy.
Yeah.
But, some actors are just so dedicated and they get to that point, and yeah, you get some of that.
Yeah, I can imagine like myself personally, like just knowing myself, I feel like I would probably be like that. Like really like I don't know if I would be able to like I don't know, like sometimes I think like I would be able, if I was like an actor, I would be able to like turn it on and off like a lot of actors are able to do. But then like
Hmm.
sometimes like there'll be moments where like I'll think about things I've experienced or moments I've been in and be like, oh, maybe I couldn't. Maybe I would be the kind of person that like
Yeah,
really takes some time to like come off of that emotion.
yeah,
But yeah, yeah, it's crazy. Especially like just kind of like improving some of that stuff is
yeah.
must be like really hard. Even like the Busia though, like her screaming "why" was like not scripted. That she just kind of did that in the moment. And it's like it worked really
Yeah,
well in the movie, I think. But,
yeah.
yeah.
I agree.
Hello again. Do you know how you can really support the show for free in just a few minutes or less? That's right. Just leave a rating and review on Spotify and Apple, or wherever you listen that might allow for ratings and reviews. These really help the visibility of the podcast. In fact, just hit that pause button right now and drop the review right now. And then you can get back to the show. I'd greatly appreciate it. Okay, I trust that you went and left that rating and review now. Back to the show.
Yeah, so the the cinematography I had mentioned earlier, some of this stuff. One of them would be just due to the location. The weather makes it really difficult to to shoot on location in the South because, like, I guess like in this area there, it was just in the summer when you're if you've never like lived in the South, in the summer you can have days where it's like blazing hot heat, and then all of a
Hmm.
sudden it can be like a cloudy day, and then
Yep,
like before you know it, there's just like it can even just be like bright and sunny, and then all of a sudden there's a thunderstorm. Um,
yep.
especially like when I lived in, I worked for a couple summers in North Carolina, more in the west side where it's mountainous, and especially like if you're in a mountainous area, like you don't see the clouds coming until they're like
Right.
over the mountain and it's just storming all of a sudden.
Yeah, yeah.
uh,
Like, hey, here it is.
yes. And so that like was hard to work with. It really complicated things for Daviau, the director of photography, but he also like reflecting on it was saying that it allowed for like a range of moods. So they could shoot like similar like scenes, like maybe the mailman coming, and so you can
Yeah,
get like shots of in the same day, like while when you were planning on shooting this anyway, you get shots of him coming in the sunny, and shots of him coming cloudy, shots of him coming in a
yeah,
thunderstorm, and like you're able to like portray the passage of time for the audience,
yeah.
just due to the moods with the weather that you happen to have that day.
Right.
um
So they learn to use it, you know, for the sake of the movie.
yeah.
They learn how to maximize that.
Yeah, it's just kind of like that movie magic efficiency. You have to like kind
Hmm.
of learn like on this kind of figure things out on with as you go.
Yeah.
Uh yeah, and then obviously they have to edit that all together once they're editing the
Right.
movie together to make it work. But yeah, the other thing was like the kind of dampness of the atmospheric dampness is the way that I heard it described, which is, I guess, just another way to say humidity.
Hmm.
It made like the light diffusion have like a lot of like pastel tones and stuff like that, which a lot of people actually like criticized about the movie, the kind of like pastelness of it and
Interesting.
um the way that like they do a lot of like work with smoke and diffusing the light through the smoke in the movie. And yeah, it's one of those things where like it's a typical kind of like Spielberg move. You see it a lot in ET because it's a lot of like it's very like fantastical and it gives that feel. And I think a
Hmm.
lot of people didn't like how like kind of fantastical some of that stuff looked in the movie. Um,
Gotcha.
yeah.
They do call it atmosphere.
Yeah.
Like, hey, we need more atmosphere.
Yeah.
They'll come in with this little, almost like a smoke machine with these big things, and it's like, diffusing it across the room to kind of give it that feel.
Yeah. And it works. It just depends on like what you're going for with the lighting and everything, on how much or little of that you need, But yeah, this is definitely interesting. I think the big thing though was that many in Hollywood then, and from what I could tell, like a lot of people still don't know how to properly film faces of black actors. And if you're listening to this, Christian is an African American man, and so like he can speak to this probably more than I can. But he's actually lit very well here on camera with me. So kudos to yourself as your own personal lighting man.
Have to give you more than just eyes and teeth.
Yeah. But yeah, I thought it was really interesting. I pulled this quote from Devillard, who's the cinematographer. He said, "It is easier to deal with darker faces against a mid-tone or darker background than it is against a light black background. The lighting on the faces can be much more subtle, and it is an awful lot easier to keep control of your walls." And so basically, like, one of the things they did was they made sure when they were like shooting all the interiors that like the walls in the houses were like mid to darker tones so that they could light better. And so I didn't really notice while I was watching the movie, but as they were like showing you scenes as they were talking about that, I was like, wow, this is actually like incredible. Like how like what's the word I'm looking for? Like how textured and kind of like beautiful the faces of these black actors look in this movie. Just like honestly, like I almost wonder if people today are even still going back to that movie when they're working with black actors to kind of like learn, okay, how do I best light my actor for this scene? Because it really looks incredible, and you could probably speak more to that than I could. But yeah, did you notice that while you were watching?
I did, because it's funny when when I'm on set and I may be like maybe the only African American in the scene or whatever, and shout out to the lighting crew because they they have a hard job, and I can tell it's a little difficult because they spend a little more time like in my area, like, okay, we got to make sure we get this lighting right, so when the camera comes to him, we can see him and that he looks good on camera, so it's a big deal. So whenever you see good lighting for your skin tone, it's like, oh, okay, they did a really good job, because it's easy to get lost in.
And I guess like I don't know, I guess like Hollywood for a long time was largely for white actors, and so it's kind of like having to relearn techniques and stuff that like you for so long, like you're I guess like you I don't know, like I guess like it's 80s, and so like really you're really starting to get a lot of more like different skin tones like in movies, when it was largely like dominated by white people for a long time. And so in the industry, I'm sure like people are like learning from each other techniques for lighting, and so that kind of like just grows, and you kind of have you start to have best practices for lighting. But then all of a sudden, like you have this boom of people of different skin tones, and all of a sudden, like those best practices might not work for everybody anymore. And so I'm sure it takes like it takes maybe a generation or two of like filmmakers to kind of like relearn how to like make adjustments for different skin tones and like lighting faces well and that sort of thing.
And also not having them look like someone they're not
right
too,
right
so
yeah exactly. So
it's definitely an artistry to it.
there is, and that's the one thing we I talk some about lighting in this show, but not a ton. But lighting is a big deal. It's a huge
Yeah.
deal, and I think this movie is like really a testament to that for sure. Um, yeah, kind of closing out production stuff. The score is the last big thing to talk about, and really like when you think about the music in this, you're having to cover music from like basically like 40 years of music.
Hmm.
1900 to 1937, I think, is sort of the approximate range of years. And that's a big
Yeah.
passage of time for musical styles, I think.
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah, Quincy Jones really like, I think he did a pretty decent job of like immersing you in the sounds of the time. Um,
Hmm.
I know they spent some time in Mississippi, like exploring the history of like juke joints and that culture
Yeah.
and all that. And he even talked about one of the songs they use is called "Dirty Dozen" in the movie, and he talked about how he used to hear that like at his grandmother's, but he never,
Hmm.
until he was like doing research for this, didn't realize that that was like one of the huge like anthems of the juke joints was that song.
Oh, yeah.
And so he's like, well, now I've got to put it in the movie. Um,
Right.
but yeah, and then like the song Sealy's Blues or Sister, um, which I've had stuck in my head all day, um, was
Is that the underlying song that they play several times throughout?
it's the one that she sings where like the crowd kind of
Oh,
splits and it's in Harpo's bar and she's
um,
singing it for Sealy.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like sister.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been stuck in my head all day, but the only word I can remember is sister. Uh, so I just like
Yeah.
say sister and then hum the rest. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, it was written. Quincy Jones wrote that with Rod Templeton and Lionel Richie, which I thought was cool.
Oh, really? Nice.
Yeah. So, and then Alice Walker said it was like one of her favorite things in the whole film was that song. So
Nice.
that song is written for the movie. She's does a song called Sealy's Blues or whatever in the book,
Hmm.
because it comes from something she hums while she's like bathing her in the book, and so it's the same thing in the movie. Uh,
Yeah, they did do
but in
that
the
in the movie.
book, you don't
Yeah.
get the actual song. You just know she sang it at the bar. So it's really
Yeah.
cool to like for them to like bring that to life in the movie. It's one of those things where
Hmm.
you're like, oh, it's kind of worth adapting a novel like this just so you can like get those extra things like that, which is
Right.
probably
Right.
why it was
Yeah.
Walker's like favorite thing in the movie because it's
Hmm.
something she as an artist doesn't do. She doesn't write songs, she writes novels, and so you know
Yeah.
in the book like she knew this character would write a song, um, but she didn't write it herself, and so I would imagine like her hearing it and seeing it performed was kind of like a really cool thing for her. Um,
It kind of reminds me, not to take this completely off topic to a whole different movie genre, but it reminds me of Twilight. In Twilight, they had, Bella's Lullaby, and we just
okay,
read about it. But then in the movie, they actually wrote an actual song for it.
gotcha.
So, and then it just blew up. So, kind
Yeah,
of like that kind of a thing.
yeah, yeah. I'm not familiar with the Twilight world in the movies, so but yeah. I mean, yeah, same thing, really, probably. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, really cool. Yeah, I thought I have some thoughts on the score as a whole that we can talk about in a bit, but yeah, um, I do think Quincy Jones, the moments where you're hearing like the kind of music of the time, I think like that all that stuff is really good.
Hmm.
But yeah, the only other thing with production is that Frank Marshall, as I mentioned earlier, directed shots in Kenya to kind of illustrate Nettie's letters from Rhodesia. They had actually already started editing the film while he was over there, so he had to like get
Yeah.
those shots and get them back to them to finish the movie. But yeah, the movie production wraps up. There is controversy even before the movie is released, which I'm gonna save that. Usually I would talk about that stuff here in the reception section of the release, but I'm gonna save that as we get into the key points of the film, because it's a key thing around this movie. But yeah, it was released in the U.S. in December, I think December 18th, 1985. So Christmas time, you get it's a kind of the classic like Christmas drama release.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's a lot of controversy, a lot of negative controversy around this movie. And then on top of that, film critics were generally not very kind to the movie either. I have like a list of critiques that film critics had of the movie at the time. They said it was shot too beautifully for it to make sense for the story. Okay. They denounced the fairy tale aesthetic, which I kind of mentioned earlier. They reproached Spielberg for removing the lesbian attraction stuff, which is, it's one of those things where it's like, you know, people will always like get upset when you don't include something from the source material in an adaptation. That's just kind of like a part of adapting something, is someone's going to be mad at you because you didn't include this part of the book that they liked, you know. That's just part of it.
But in 84, 85, you know, it's probably...
It's a very different time. For sure. Yeah, and then they spoke out against eliminating the Squeak character, which I kind of mentioned, but you know, you only have so much runtime to work with. So
exactly.
They also were against the recurring fall gag that Harpo did, which happens several times in the movie, which I'll talk about that later.
Some comic relief.
They even like the scenes of Africa were not accepted. This is a quote from the Harvard Crimson. Whenever Spielberg has trouble interpreting the text, he slips into the trademark Raider-esque exoticism. I'm just like, I didn't get that at all from that. It was just kind of like, oh, here's some insert shots of, you know, Africa. I don't really get that critique, but okay. The New York Times found Quincy Jones's music intrusive, and they pointed out a lot of tonal discontinuities, which is personally a problem I had, that we'll talk about. And then the New Yorker's Pauline Kael. Pauline Kael is notoriously a very like love it or hate it kind of film critic, and so like she'll either like really praise your work or she just like will tear it apart. And I'm sure if you're listening, you might be hearing some thunder from mine and Christian's side of the microphone, so just ignore that. It's lightning striking against Pauline Kael's harsh critique, where she said that Spielberg's The Color Purple is probably the least authentic feeling of any of his full-length films.
Wow.
Yeah, so she did not go for it, I guess. Old Pauline Kael. But yeah, Walker herself was even a bit annoyed with the film when it came out, due to just like different aspects of it, probably relating to, you know, the Suge and Steely attraction stuff is part of it. The kind of like some of the comedic stuff too, I think, was part of it. But she did like in hindsight in the interviews kind of talk about growing to appreciate it, and even appreciating like the sweetness with which he like kind of directs the Steely and Suge relationship. So she kind of come to appreciate it more over time, which is cool to hear. But despite all of the controversy, all of the film critic reception, it still was a pretty good success. It earned about $98 million worldwide box office with a $15 million budget. So I mean,
laughing to the bank, you know. So
now I will say this: his film 1941, which was a similar thing. It was probably a similar budget and probably made about a similar amount. I think that movie was like really bad. So like, yeah, they made money off of it, but the movie itself was like really terrible. It's like, yeah, it's the only like movie that I've covered in this whole podcast that I would say like that's a bad movie.
Interesting.
But yeah, some people do like that movie, but those people are harder to find than the people that don't. So,
I think maybe this movie, The Color Purple, carries that crowd of like, I've read the book, so let me go watch the movie.
yeah. And so I think I carried a little bit of that into the movie too. And like, it's honestly one of those things where like, it's hard to live up to the source material because sometimes like, so I would say like, so Jaws was adapted from a book. The book is bad. I didn't think the book was very good. I listened to that book on audiobook too. Not very good. And so yeah. And then I'm trying to think if there was another book I don't know that there was another book adaptation before this one by Spielberg. But this one, I think, so for Jaws, like the movie is just like incredibly much better than the book. And
Yeah.
I think this one, I don't think the movie like is like drastically worse than the book, but the book is just like phenomenal. And so it's hard to live up to that source material. So I think that is probably part of it.
That's okay.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't read the book, but I can get down with that critique.
Yeah. But yeah, it's successful. It was like the fourth in ticket sales by the end of 1985. It was behind Rocky IV and ahead of Out of Africa, which Out of Africa, I'm pretty sure is the movie that won Best Picture that year. Which I've never seen it, so I don't know. Can't really speak to if it's good or not. But The Color Purple did receive 11 Oscar nominations. It did not receive it for Best Director, which people kind of say was like kind of a snub move.
Yeah.
But it received, I'll kind of list out the nominations. It got it for Best Picture, lead actress for Whoopi. It got 2 supporting actress nominations for Margaret Avery as Shug and for Oprah as Sophia. It got a screenplay nom, cinematography, art direction, costume design, an original song nomination for Miss Seeley's Blues or Sister, nomination for the score, and for the makeup. And it did not win any of them.
That's wild.
So we'll talk about some critiques of the movie that the NAACP had along with other groups. But once this happened, the NAACP kind of went back around and is now accusing the Academy of refusing to honor Black artists and ignoring films about African Americans. And so, which is fair, to be honest. So they might have disliked some things about the movie, but I think they also like recognize like it is still good that there's all these Black artists being represented, and they were not happy when the Academy basically like it gave them the nominations, but they didn't win any of them. Like that's I think it's a record. It's tied for a record of the most nominations with no wins.
And not a one.
Yeah.
I think, and I don't know how true this is, but I saw in one interview on the front end, the NAACP was like, "Don't go watch this movie, boycott it." You know.
Yeah. Well, we're about to get into that. So. Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, they kind of doubled back, but it's, to be fair, like it's okay to have nuanced reactions to things where like you're like, I don't think this is good, but at the same time, like you're not going to recognize any of the people in our culture. Like you're going to give them all these nominations and not let any of them win. Like it.
That's a tough look.
Yeah,
it's a tough look. 11 nominations and not a single.
Yeah.
I would like to know. I'm not abreast to the Oscar history,
Yeah, me
but
either.
I would like to know what it was going against that year
Yeah.
in those categories.
Yeah. I mean, I can maybe like vamp for a few seconds as I'm like Googling, but I do know that Out of Africa, I'm pretty sure won Best Picture. I'm not sure which other movies were nominated, but I am clicking the link right now so we can kind of maybe see. I don't want highlights. I want the full list. Oh, here we go. Okay, so actress Whoopi was against. So the winner was Geraldine Page for The Trip to Bountiful, which I've never heard of that
Okay.
actress or that
Never
movie.
heard of
I reckon, okay, Meryl Streep in Out of Africa was nominated. Jessica Lange in a movie called Sweet Dreams. I do know Jessica Lange. I don't know Sweet Dreams. Supporting role, the winner was Angelica Houston, who I do know for a movie called Prizzi's Honor, which I've never heard of. So I mean, I don't know this Geraldine Page actress. I do know Angelica Houston, but I've never seen those, so I can't really. It's hard to like make any like judgments when I haven't seen these other movies and performances. But
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know how like Oprah doesn't win that. Today, Oprah wins that. Wins for that Sophia role for sure. Yeah, Out of Africa won a bunch of stuff. So it won like art direction, cinematography, directing. Sidney Pollack was the director for Out of Africa.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, Out of Africa kind of like won a lot of it won for score. Did it win for? Yeah, it won Best Picture. I'm trying to see. It won for sound. It won for screenplay.
Must have been a very great movie.
Yeah, I don't. From what I gather, like it's kind of like okay. But that's kind of how the Academy goes sometimes. Sometimes they like give all the awards to an okay movie. But
waiting for the day a Fast and a Furious movie wins an Oscar.
Has it not won any like effects or anything?
Not that I'm aware.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, you and other like fast heads like Christopher Nolan are probably like waiting for that day. Christopher Nolan, the notorious Fast and Furious stan.
Yeah, I love him. I love him.
It's not my thing, but I understand like the love. You know what I mean? I can appreciate and respect like the people's love of that franchise. I haven't seen all of them. I've seen a few of them. But yeah, this the only other thing about this before we jump into the key points is that it was adapted, as we've said, to a Broadway musical in 2005 is when that musical started. And it was produced by Oprah and Quincy Jones through Oprah's production company, Harpo Productions, which, as you'll maybe recognize, Harpo is the name of the character in this book, but it's also Oprah backwards. Which
fun fact.
I think that was something that Spielberg like pointed out when he was like hiring them. He was like, "Oh, Oprah backwards is Harpo," you know. Yeah, and the Broadway musical is kind of based on the movie script, but also on the book, so it probably has like a few differences sort of going on there. But yeah, let's jump into some key points. Let's jump into some of the controversy. Are you prepared to delve into the controversy around this movie? We'll see. The first one comes with this question: can a white male director do this story justice? Let's jump right in to this. So that was a little controversy around the movie. It's not what I would say was the main controversy, but there was some talk around it. Spielberg talks about how like it's one of those things where he like is being very careful about how he's like talking about it, but he did say that he could empathize with some of the, I guess, like oppression with like he had experiences as a kid with like anti-Semitism and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
obviously like a very different thing.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things where you can connect with something from your own life that helps you empathize with the experience of another. So like, and that's
Sure.
kind of, he's not trying to like say it's the same thing in the interviews. He's just saying like it helped him connect with that experience
Yeah.
and understand it,
Yeah.
which I totally understand. But yeah, were you gonna say something?
My my thing is he was sought out
Right? Yeah,
for this
yeah.
movie, so that's number
He was even
one. And
hesitant,
number yeah, like, hey, and so my question with that is, how far does the movie go, you know, without him?
Mhm.
So like, it's almost like a Brady Belichick thing. Like, was
Sure.
it Brady? Was it Belichick? Who needed who?
Yeah, yeah.
So I think Steven Spielberg's cachet, I think that helped.
Mhm.
But also that helped his career too, with being able to do a movie like that.
Yeah, yeah. It kind of propelled him into a new phase of his career,
Right. I think being that he was thought out, but he also had consultants like,
Mhm.
hey, this is how this should be,
Yeah.
and that he was open to that. I think that's a really good look, and
Yep.
that kind of helps the whole situation. So I think, if you're in that position, but you're seeking guidance and help, like, hey, how do we make this as authentic as
Yeah.
possible? And let me ask the people who would know the most,
Yes.
and let me have them involved and represent it. I say, why not? His popularity, his skills as a director, I
Mhm.
mean, that only helps bring the story a little further,
Yeah.
in my opinion.
Yeah. And it's really like honestly like the kind of usual charges when it comes to something like this. It's like, he doesn't understand black people. He
Mm-hmm.
sentimentalizes their experience. Like he doesn't actually show like the true poverty they experience cuz it's like a more upscale property owners centered. And most of
Mm-hmm.
those are just like really unfair like charges because it, you know, obviously, like I can only speak to that so much as like a white male myself, but at the same time, it's
Mm-hmm.
like this is being adapted. Like the story is written by a black woman, and he's not really
Mm-hmm.
changing the story. Like the
Mm-hmm.
story is what it is. Like, and so
Yeah.
like. And I think even Alice Walker talked about how some of the charges that were brought against the movie like were hurtful to her because it was like ignoring that it was her story. Um,
Yeah.
and even like we'll get into next the controversy about like um, perpetuating stereotypes about black men. But she was like
Mm-hmm.
really hurt by that because she didn't write this to be about that. It was about the experiences of these women, and it was written from like
Mm-hmm.
experience that she had heard people in her family talk about. So like she was
Yeah.
actually really hurt by that. But yeah, the thing is like I think Spielberg did everything he could as right as
Yeah.
he could do it.
Yeah.
For one, like I do have some like quibbles that we'll talk about in a minute with like the way the film is made and the kind of Steven Spielbergness of it. I think
Mm-hmm.
maybe doesn't necessarily work with some of the material. But that
Okay.
doesn't really have anything to do with him being a white male director, and it doesn't really detract from um it, I guess it does detract a little bit, but it doesn't really have anything to do. It's just his directing style. It doesn't really have
Okay.
anything to do with like him not understanding the black experience. It's kind of
Sure.
more like, well, this is the guy you brought on to do it, and this is just how he makes
Yeah.
movies. And it
Yeah.
sometimes like clashes, in my opinion, with the material. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but it's one of the things I heard in Molly Haskell has a book called A Life in Films. Steven Spielberg, A Life in Film. Um, and she was talking about how a lot of people don't really talk about one of Steven Spielberg's. They'll talk about like John Ford's influence on Spielberg and people like that, but they don't talk about a big influence that you can see in Spielberg's work, which is a movie like Gone with the Wind. And so it's this grand sweeping like period piece kind of epic movie. And this is a similar thing. It's like this grand sweeping, you're covering like a lifetime of these characters. It's a period piece.
Yeah.
And she was relating Spielberg doing The Color Purple to what the director, who he was also a Jewish director of Gone with the Wind, trying to do the best he could with the oppression of Black people. And then when the movie came out, like he got a lot of flack for, you know, the way that the Black characters are portrayed, when he was really like actually trying to like make progression with that, like earnestly he was, but then still like got attacked for it. And it's a similar thing here with Spielberg in that he's like earnestly like trying to do good for Black representation, like having their story told, but gets like all the flack for it. And it's like, can we win?
Yeah.
And like you were saying, like, and a lot of the actors in the interviews, they were saying like, and this movie, like it's a bunch of no names, like it's a bunch of no names actors, even if they like, and on top of that, they're Black actors in a industry that's very white. So like, not only are they not known names, but they're just like, they don't unfortunately match the criteria of what typically the studios go for to make money. And so like this movie probably doesn't get made without Steven Spielberg, you know? Like, so it's just kind of like, I don't know. It's hard. It's hard because like there's a degree to which like, and yeah, maybe we'll set this aside, and because I do have like a defense of Spielberg coming up, and so we'll table that, and then we'll come back to it when we get to that defense. He did also get flacked from feminists for the removal of like the more explicit love scenes. We've touched on that, how like Spielberg probably just isn't the one to do that. He did later apologize for that. I don't know that he necessarily needed to, but he did. And honestly, like the more kind of like explicit erotic stuff isn't my thing either. I was telling my wife like some of those scenes, like some of those parts in the book were like very uncomfortable for me. Obviously like they do get into like more detail than I would typically like be comfortable with, but so like for instance in Jaws, like this is very different, but there's some like more erotic stuff in Jaws, but it's just like totally unnecessary and doesn't like really add anything to anything. But in The Color Purple, like there's a really strong purpose behind those moments. And it has a lot to do with a woman taking ownership of her body and kind of being shown and guided into the fact that she is beautiful and that she is allowed to feel pleasure. And that's a big deal. So like while it's not like my thing, like I don't typically like go for stuff like that. Like as I was listening to it in the book, I was like, okay, this makes sense. It's empowering a woman to have ownership of her body and to claim like the right to feel pleasure. And which I think we all should have. Like I think men, women, everyone should like have ownership of their own body and be allowed to feel pleasure. Like that's just a part of being human, you know? And so like, I get why it's in the material. And so like, I guess all that to say, like, I understand why like feminists were kind of upset that it wasn't more like some of the more explicit stuff was in there. But again, it's Steven Spielberg. Like
that's not his
It's
usual
just yeah.
MO.
It's just you got the movie. You brought on Steven Spielberg. You got the movie
Hmm.
that Steven Spielberg was going to make. Like, if you
Hmm.
wanted that stuff, like you should have gotten a different director.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's kind of just hard to put that on Spielberg. It's like,
It's,
yeah,
yeah.
um,
It's tough because it's like creative choices, one,
yeah,
and then, and so how much room do you have for that?
yeah,
When it's art,
yeah.
the actor, that's art, the director, that's
Mhm.
art for them as well, so you have creative
Yeah.
choices that you make,
And
it's hard to please
yeah, to
everybody.
be honest, like the way he ends up doing that section is like might be a little bit more sensual than like explicitly showing things,
Hmm.
just kind
Yeah.
of like that he talked about it being like more poetic, but like when you watch
Hmm.
that scene and the way like it follows their hands like as
Hmm.
they're like touching each other and stuff, and like it's to be honest, like it is still very sensual, and I'm so like
Yeah.
I'm kind of like, yeah, it isn't what's in the book, but like it is.
It's not like he skipped the
Yeah,
whole thing.
like I'm watching it, I'm
Like
like,
they,
this is pretty sensual. I don't know, like
yeah, yeah. Right, right.
but yeah, so that was another thing. Let's touch on the major controversy of this, which um so today you talked about how like this movie was quoted in your family growing up and stuff.
Hmm.
And today it really is like considered a classic in Black culture. I know like some other friends that are African American that are like feel the same way. And
Yeah.
obviously like it was a big thing in your family growing up.
Hmm.
Um, but at the time, like there was a lot of hand wringing and unsurety about the film.
Hmm.
And in some of the issues. We talked about like a white male directed it, and there was controversy around that, but it was criticized for that. But that was really not the main controversy. It wasn't why people were protesting the movie. Um,
Hmm.
the main controversy was over the depiction of Black male characters. So organizations like the Coalition Against Black Exploitation denounced the film because of this. Even a month before its release, they demonstrated in front of
Yeah.
Quincy Jones' offices. They protested in front of the Motion Picture Academy in LA during a screening for the Black Women's Forum. So they were
Hmm.
against it. The NAACP expressed similar criticisms, talking about the portrayal of Black male characters being, quote, very stereotypical. And then just like generally among historians and writers and columnists, this controversy was like pretty immediate. Um,
Hmm.
and, and even like in the Black community at the time, the opinions of that surrounding that were very like divided. Um,
Hmm.
and very understandably, women were much more accepting of the film
Yeah.
because it's a film about these women. It's not
The
about the men. It's about the women.
yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, that was the big controversy at the time. Um, and there's a NPR podcast called Pop Culture Happy Hour.
Okay.
And they had done, I don't remember when this came out. I just kind of was searching around to see if I could find some good material to kind of research more into this. And they did something called Screening Ourselves, a series, and they covered this movie and the controversy around this movie as part of that
Hmm.
series. And they talked about, it's very interesting. I'll try to remember to link it in the episode notes if you're listening when this releases. Hopefully I'll remember to link to that episode of Pop Culture Happy Hour. But if not, you can easily search it and find it. But they talked about, at the time, there was a show called Tony Brown's Journal, and he had brought on kind of like a panel debate about
Hmm.
surrounding this movie. He had 4 defenders of it and 4 detractors of it, and they ended up dubbing the this debate "Purple Rage" because of how like heated it got. It even
Yeah.
got heated to at one point one of the like detractors of the film basically calling one of the supporters that we'll talk about in a minute, basically said he might as well be white. It's like basically like calling
Oh
him an
wow.
Uncle Tom. Like, yeah,
See.
so it got heated at point.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but they kind of, I appreciated the episode because they broke down the major critiques, so I didn't have to like
Mhm.
go back and listen to the whole debate. They just like played clips from it and like broke it down. But
Yeah.
they ended up breaking down 4 major critiques that were expressed. The first one and main one was that it perpetuated harmful stereotypes about black men to a
Mhm.
global audience that would like believe those to be true of all black people.
Mhm.
And so here's the thing, like a lot of people that like were defenders of the movie at the time and like upset with people that had this critique. A lot of those people like look back and kind of understand in hindsight that critique. Because like if you think about where you are, you're in the mid 1980s. You're in the
Mhm.
era of the Reaganomics era, and we all kind of like are aware now of the way that the Reagan administration would portray black men.
Mhm.
You know, there's a lot of talk
Mhm.
of black men as predators at this time. And
Mhm.
so when you have a movie where all the black men in it are basically abusive, like it's
Yeah.
like, okay, like I understand why these people were upset. Like,
It's not a good
yeah,
look.
it's to them it feels like propaganda
Yeah.
working against them. Like
Mhm.
it's totally understandable. Um,
Yeah.
and so that was like the main critique, the main controversy.
Yeah.
And people were like very upset about that. And then,
It's kind of like the whole airing dirty laundry,
yeah,
you know?
yeah,
It's and again in art and stuff like that, how do you navigate
yeah,
that? You know, because there's a story someone wants to tell.
right.
Should it be told? That's
Yeah,
debatable, you know, and because people are going to look bad, and you do have the chance of like those stereotypes happening to where, oh, is this how all African American men
yeah,
are? This how they all treat their wives, you
yeah,
know, because this is kind of lining up with what
yeah,
the government is kind of saying right now. So it's it's not a good look
yeah,
at all, you know.
yeah. It's
So it's
not. It's one of those
tough.
things though, like you were saying in art. It's like, okay, the people that want to see what they want to see are going to see it either way.
Yeah.
You know,
Mhm.
the people that are actually going to see this and be like, oh, yep, see, this is how all black men are. Like, they're going to
Mhm.
find reasons to think that anyway, in my opinion.
Yeah.
People that are
Yeah.
actually like reasonable aren't going to watch this and be like, oh, yeah, all black men must beat their wives. It's like, no, this
Yeah.
is a specific story, you know, about these
Yeah. Yeah.
specific people. Like, it's not like, just like I feel like any reasonable person wouldn't think that. But
Yeah.
again, like I'm kind of removed from that atmosphere. Like we're
Mhm.
removed from it. So I don't, it's hard for me to like really like critique their critique a whole lot because
Yeah.
it, at this, while I do think like it's a little bit overblown, at the same time it's like it really is like totally an understandable critique. Like you said, like not a good
Mhm.
look,
Yeah.
especially in the
Yeah.
time that it was coming out. Um,
Right. On the same token, I would say though, for African American women who were or did
mhm.
experience those type of things, you know, there's something to be said there
Yeah.
too, you
Oh,
know,
exactly.
because if the author, you know, if she has her parents or grandparents or whoever experienced
Yeah.
that, I'm sure that they weren't the only one,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Exactly. Yeah. Um, yeah. Yeah, and we'll keep talking about that. But yeah, the second major critique they pointed out in this panel debate was that these same stereotypes would perpetuate self-hate and shame in Black viewers, and so they would point to stuff like Seeley constantly being called ugly and stuff like that. And that's an understandable critique too, honestly. But again, like, my thing is, and this kind of goes with what you were just talking about. Like, it's written by a Black woman. Like, this isn't like a white man, like, kind of perpetuating stereotypes. He's
Yeah.
adapting the story written by a Black woman. Like, and that's that she's writing out of her experience and like stories that she's heard. Like, so it's just kind of like, well, it's not. This was her. This was
Yeah.
like the experience she wanted to write about, and they made it
Yeah.
into a movie, and now everyone's seeing it. It's kind of like, what are you gonna
Right.
do?
Yeah.
The third one was
Tough.
the third and fourth main critiques were just kind of like, in my opinion, just like didn't really have good basis. The third one was that it was historically inaccurate because abuse at the hands of Black men was not an issue for women in the early 1900s. And I'm just like, you don't think like ever? like she
Yeah.
wrote this out of
Yeah.
stories she heard about her family at that time. So she's not just like making this story up to make Black men look bad.
Yeah.
So I just, and I think in the episode they even talk about how like some of the stuff he pointed out just like wasn't good, like wasn't good information.
Yeah.
The other one was that the Seeley Shug romance was a threat to heterosexual Black couples and Black masculinity. And I'm just kind of like, well, I guess like I'm kind of, it may be another one of those things where you're kind of removed from some of the stuff that was going on at the time. But that kind of seems a little bit ridiculous to me also. But I do think that might be tied a little bit to the first critique. And as far as Black masculinity goes, maybe like those stereotypes of Black men, like maybe it was like a threat to that. But I don't know. I don't think that should be the thing you see as a threat. It's like, if that's what the threat is, then it's weak to begin with. Surely that's not like a huge threat to your masculinity. Two women maybe like having some romance. It's kind of like, I don't know.
Yeah. It's pretty. How can I say it? That particular issue, and I can't speak for the entire African American
Sure,
community,
yeah.
obviously, but I do know stuff like that is, it's a source of contention,
Sure.
and I think as African American people, anything that would further take away from the advancement,
Yeah.
of the community, it gets immediately like met with, some apprehension, because for so long, we were looked at as less than and stuff. So it's like, hey, we can't have anything else that, keeps us from advancing. So things like that, things like, husbands beating wives and
Right.
stuff like that, even though that very may well be happening and is a legitimate issue, it's like, hey, y'all handle that in house. We don't need everybody else knowing what's
Kind of
going
the airing
on.
your dirty
That
laundry
kind of a
thing,
thing.
like you were saying. Yeah.
Yes. Right. So it's, and it's tough because it's like, oh, real people are being affected by this, and this is an issue that should be,
Right.
handled and talked about. but at the same time, does it come at the cost of these other communities having more ammo to be like, oh, well, see what y'all doing over
Yeah.
here, see what y'all doing with this
And
kind
like,
of a thing.
to be
So,
fair, like that happens way too
yeah,
often.
yeah,
So yeah. I mean, like, I think the I think all of these critiques are pretty fair, considering that. Maybe not the historical inaccuracy of abuse. Like that's
yeah,
kind of like that's a
right,
little bit ridiculous. It's like, how do you even know? Like, where are
yeah,
you pulling that information from? But the other three, like,
yeah,
you know, the other three, to be honest, are just like, yeah, it makes sense. Like, you have a right
hmm,
to be, at the very least, to be bringing it up and questioning
yeah,
it
yeah,
and like
yeah,
making it a big deal so that people don't think that these stereotypes are true. Um,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
so that's understandable for sure. The actors themselves were kind of upset with the controversy.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
they for one, like they were very close to the project, so like this was
hmm,
their like baby, like they made this together, and they were,
yeah,
they were upset that other people in their community were like protesting the film and stuff. Whoopi
hmm,
even said that the protests like were ridiculous and set black actors back like 5 to 6 years,
hmm,
because studios didn't want to touch an all black cast for a while. Like
yeah, yeah, yeah,
when a film like this comes out, it's a big film and it gets protests and like all this heated controversy around it. Like the studios just want to make money. Like
right,
they're not
right, yeah,
they're unfortunately, like they're not that
hmm,
interested in progress, like in like which ethnic group is progressing in society or not. They just want to make money.
right,
Like
exactly.
it shouldn't be
Yeah,
that way, but that's just the reality. Um,
that's the bottom line.
yeah.
Yeah, the bottom line.
And so like Whoopi's point is that like, and I think even Margaret Avery kind of like confirmed that separately, and she was talking about how like after this movie she couldn't get an acting job for like 2 years
Hmm,
after this movie, which is wild because she's so good in it.
yeah,
But
yeah,
there was, I don't know if it's necessarily tied to this controversy or not, but like it's hard to like wonder, like is it because of
yeah,
that? But yeah, so that was a big thing that came up. And Oprah says that it's a classic because the material itself is a classic. So like even in Bousquet, the Nettie actress, kind of said that the love with which it was made kind of outlasts the negativity and criticism. And I think
hmm,
we kind of can see that now because, as we talked about, like it's kind of become a classic in Black culture despite all of this
right,
controversy. Um,
right,
and yet some of the defending of Spielberg and this movie, um, you know, we kind of already touched on the fact that like it's 1985 and Spielberg's power in the industry kind of like is maybe what gets this made in the first place. Um,
hmm,
but another big defender was a man named Armand White. He was probably its biggest defender. I think he called it the best film of 1985 even. But he was an African American gay man who was a film critic. So he kind of had, I guess, 2 points of connection with it,
hmm,
in those two ways. And
yeah,
but he was actually the one of the detractors on the Tony Brown panel called.
okay,
He said he might as well be a white man, um, to Armand White, which is, I guess, kind of
yeah,
ironic because I guess in a sense his surname is White, so he is, which I'm just now realizing. But, but yeah, uh, I guess I I don't know if it's okay to make that joke, but I thought it was kind of ironic and funny. But yeah, so he was a defender of the movie. He saw the focus on oppression of women as a welcome relief from the knee-jerk issue of racial discrimination.
Yeah.
So he kind of saw it as like, this isn't about a movie about race at all. It's about women and the
Yeah.
oppression of women, which I think is how
Mhm.
Walker herself saw it. You know, we talked about it when she
Yeah.
wrote the book. She wasn't really interested in showing the oppression of white people against black people. She was interested in women being oppressed.
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
and like she can't really write about white women being oppressed because she's not a white woman. So yeah,
Yeah.
makes
Yeah.
sense. But yeah, he defends Spielberg too. You know, he talked about how art is about empathy, and a white man director doesn't detract from like the end product you get.
Mhm.
And I think that's fair. It's kind of one of those things where I can kind of see both sides. It's like, you know, a white male as a director can only like direct that experience so far. That's
Yeah.
a fair critique, but also like I
Mhm.
understand Armand White's like defense too. It's like, well, no, like, and you talked about it too. Like he's empathizing. That's what art is about. Like,
Yeah.
it's not it's not as ridiculous as the like, well, he's not an alien and he directed E.T., which is kind of a ridiculous thing. But Armand White's defense is fair. I wrote down this quote from him too. He said, "The Color Purple feels like the first Insiders movie about Black America because the characters aren't defined by their relations to the white world, nor created through a white artist's sympathetic condescension. These are new Black archetypes. As fictional creations, they are so free of political justification that the whole issue of correctness is zapped." I thought that was a really, really good insight
Yeah.
into why the film, probably like why the film has lasted despite the controversy, and
Yeah.
its appreciation.
Yeah.
But he does talk about how like film culture still really doesn't hold up the movie as important, and he like feels similar to the NAACP because he thinks that the the film industry and film culture is still only interested in Black people being beaten down and depressed and victimized, and not in them
Yeah.
being joyful, which really like
Yeah.
the end of this movie is a joyful experience. Like it doesn't
Mhm.
end with victimization and depression. It ends with joy. And the
Yeah.
book is the same way, even more so in the book, actually. The end of the book like leaves you like feeling uplifted and joyful and um like a full human being. And I
Mhm.
think that's like a really interesting point that White makes, that like him as a Black man like felt joy from where this
Yeah.
movie took him, and maybe the film
Mhm.
culture is still like not as enlightened as they claim to be, because
Yeah.
they're unwilling to uplift this film that ends with such joy,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. It's I think it's tricky, I think, because there's so many stories of oppression and
Right.
stuff like that, and it's like, hey, we need to tell these stories
Right.
to show everybody what's happening.
Mhm.
But at the same time, we don't have a lot of stories where it's like, hey, this is just a great family, or this is a
Yeah.
great story just about, not about all of that stuff,
Yeah.
but just a wholesome kind of a thing. And I think the former, it does have more of that shock factor,
Yeah.
it probably makes more money and stuff like that. Um, and so there is something to
Yeah.
that, I think,
Yeah. Basically, we need more American fictions.
Yeah,
Have you
yeah.
seen American?
Which I heard was
Oh,
a great
you've got to
movie.
see
I
it.
haven't seen it yet,
It's
but I
great.
love Sterling K.
Yeah,
Brown.
It's so good. Sterling K. Brown, and then oh man, my mind just went totally blank.
I know who you talking about.
Jeffrey Wright.
He's
Jeffrey Wright.
yeah, from the James Bond
Yeah.
movies, 007.
Yeah, I love Jeffrey Wright too. They're both really great in it, and the movie's really really good. It's like half satire, half family drama, but it's like it's a black family that is just like so full, and like it's like they're a loving family. They have family drama just like you would expect from any family, but they're just like they're full people. Like they're not defined by any stereotypes. You know, it's just really good. We need more movies like that that win Academy Awards, like best screenplay, which it did. You know, so so you know we're getting there. But yeah, we've got some work to do for sure.
Right. I read a quote, and I can't remember who it was, but someone said like, "I don't want to make another slave movie."
Yeah.
Or I don't want to be in another slave movie.
We've got enough,
you know,
honestly.
Along...
We've got a lot of them. And they're very good. I think it's one of those things where it's like we have the unfortunate thing is that it's those movies that get recognized, and not enough of the American fiction types get recognized because they're out there. Like those movies are out there. It's just that they don't get the big push, and they don't get the award nominations and all that stuff. I think that's the big thing. So we definitely have we're getting there, I guess. Like but yeah, that's really like, I mean, you have like the, like we talked about, like the hindsight of it, you know, it kind of taking time to get out of that like alarmism and chaos of the 80s to really appreciate the movie for what it is. The NAACP actually did eventually award it some Image Awards. So like it got some recognition. And then, you know, the musical was made by, you know, Black producers and Black writers, and I think that's probably helped like rebuild the story's reputation too, to a degree. I mean, you have Blitz directing the movie. He's I don't know what all he's directed. I know he's directed some Beyonce music video stuff. I'm not sure about what else he's directed, but he's directed the movie version of the musical, the new one, which I think is really good. I do really enjoy musicals. I still think the musical tone is a little strange for the movie, but I kind of understand it. It kind of like, now looking back on it, it kind of feels like they are focusing more on the joy than on the depression and the oppression. So like in hindsight, when I was watching the movie, the tone felt kind of strange because it is very like hard material, and a lot of the music is still pretty like joyful and exciting. But in hindsight, like after watching this and like reading all the controversy and stuff, in hindsight, I'm always wondering if like I just experienced it wrong. Like if they are like actually trying to reclaim some of that joy that you see like as you get to the end of the book, just spread through the whole musical. So I don't know. I kind of want to go watch it again now from a different perspective, and I would probably honestly like it more. But yeah, I'm glad that it's gotten its recognition after all the controversy, for sure.
Yeah, because it is a classic.
Yeah.
Hello there, listener. Don't you ever want more for your life? Don't you ever dream of surpassing the status of just podcast listener? Well, I've got good news. If you head on over to establishingshotpod.com and click the Send a Voicemail button on the right side of your screen, you can be featured on the podcast. I'd love to hear from you, whether it's a comment in response to an episode you liked, an opinion of mine you disagreed with, or just a question for me. And if you're too shy to have your voice featured, you can always email me at establishingshotpod@gmail.com. Don't settle for just being a podcast listener. Reach for the stars and get featured on The Establishing Shot. Back to the show.
Well, we've talked a long time already, but let's try to hit some other main things. Were there any intriguing shots or sequences that like stood out to you, like where you were watching and you were just kind of like, oh wow, that was an awesome sequence, or wow, that was an awesome shot?
So two of them come to mind. One was a shot of Mr. Outside, but they shot it through the glass of I think it was snowing or something
Yeah.
like that. But they shot it through that. I think that was cool. That stuck out to me. And they talked about this shot in the interview that I watched. But when they transitioned characters from the younger Seeley to the older Seeley, I thought that was a really
Incredible.
cool. Yeah, that was like very impressive. And the third one, I said two, but there's three, was the shot whenever Sophia punched Squeak. And they kind of like panned around, almost like Marvel-esque type. You know, I was like, oh, that's a really good shot. I really like that.
Oh yeah, I wasn't even thinking about that, but now that you're explaining that, I was like, oh yeah, that was interesting.
It almost like was a shot ahead of its time,
Sure.
you know, because I'm thinking 1984. This seems like a pretty advanced shot. I really liked it, and some of the long shots that they did, you know, of Seeley walking through the house, going to different rooms. I liked some of those.
Yeah, you do get a lot of like just following kind of characters, which is good. The transitions in this movie are so good, I think. There's like really good visual and also like sound transitions that like it's like Spielberg was kind of, this is almost like his peak transition scenes movie, because like they're just like all throughout. You have that shadow one that you talked about with Seeley from young to older, that's just like really good and iconic. I mean, it's like I have the movie right here behind me, and on the front cover is like the shadow of Seeley reading on the Blu-ray I have. So yeah, it's kind of like an iconic, I think it's on some of the posters, you know, that's the shot. Yeah, just really good. And then like even sound transitions, like there's a point later in the movie where it transitions from Seeley reading Nettie's letter, and there's like these kind of like tonal drips of water and leaking into different like pots, and then it transitions sound wise to the African percussion with the different like tones, and it's like, oh, that was a really good like sound transition. Kind of taking you from one world to another audially. Really good, a lot of really good stuff like that. Some other ones I thought were good. The tracking shot through the flowers at the beginning, where it's like the flowers are like going by really fast, and it's like the camera moving, you know, with them running. I thought it's just like really beautiful. The Miss Seeley's blues, the crowd, like I wrote down in my notes, like the crowd splits. So like she starts to sing the song and the crowd like splits, and it creates this like lane of vision from her to Seeley. It's like just really cool. And even just like the way whenever they have like Suge singing in the Harpo's juke joint, like the way the camera moves around in there is just like so good and like interesting. And like it's what I like about it is it gives you it like what's the best way to say it? It kind of like ingrains you in the culture of what's going on in the juke joint, which
Yeah.
is which
Right.
is that's Spielberg. That's like something Spielberg does really well. So like
Mhm.
in that way, like he is like helping you as a white man in like learn about this black culture just because he
Yeah.
knows like just technically how to move
Mhm.
the camera to achieve that. Um
Yeah.
and so I think that's really well done. Some other interesting ones, like maybe symbolic, is like the church is being bulldozed and it does
Oh
this like
yeah.
reverse tracking out of the cross like in the door where you're like seeing the
Yeah.
church being bulldozed through the cross in the door, which is probably like kind of
Yeah.
symbolic of that kind of like rethinking your theology, I guess, that is in the
Yeah.
book. Um yeah, there's a lot of like really interesting shots like that. Um
I really like that scene when Suge is singing, but the church is singing too.
yeah.
That whole portion, that was very
Mm,
powerful. You know, I didn't know what was going on, where they were going
yeah.
with that, but how it all came together, I thought that was super cool. That was one of my favorite parts of the
Yeah.
movie.
It's so interesting because like that part that part doesn't it's one of those things where like I could see how this could work for people, but that part didn't work for
Mhm.
me. Um
Oh,
and
okay.
I think it's like it kind of goes with some we can get into some of my quibbles. I probably had way more than you you did. But in a lot
I'm a little lenient on
yeah, a
movies,
lot of it
so
is from just because I had read the book first. And I
okay.
almost wonder
Yeah.
if I would have liked this more if I hadn't read the book and just like watched
Okay.
it. But like one of the things that like is a problem for me is like the characters in the book are so they're like all of them are like very very like fleshed out and full
Okay.
characters. And I feel like the movie leaves a lot to be desired as far as that goes. And I
Okay.
think part of it is just like in a book, you know, you have a lot more space to get into a lot of detail, obviously. Um,
Yeah.
and what's not helped is that it spans like so much time in the lives of these
Yeah.
characters. And in the book, it works. But in the movie, like you're having to like there's only so much time you have to like dig into like
Yeah.
these characters developing and how they're
Yeah.
developing. And so
So they have to pick and choose
yeah,
who to,
and
focus
yeah,
on
and
and
so coming from the book to the movie, um I was like I was just like these characters aren't as nuanced and interesting as they
mm,
were in the book. And so it's
yeah.
just kind of like almost like oh, maybe I should have just watched the movie before I read the book because I might have like
Yeah.
thought it was better. But like Ceely's development in the movie is kind of like all out of order. Like one of the pivotal things
Okay.
in her development is a conversation she has with Suge about God and how she pictures God as like a white man. And how
Mm,
Suge was like, yeah, I used to also. And I had to like tell him to leave whenever he would pop up in my head. And they go through and
oh,
her talking
okay.
about so at the end towards the end of the movie, like Suge is talking about like God being pissed if you walk by the color purple and don't appreciate it. Well, that happens in that
Yeah.
conversation way earlier on in the book. And that's
Okay.
like a pivotal conversation for Celie like developing as a character. Like she starts to
Mhm.
look for God in different ways than she was before.
Okay.
And that's a big part of her like develop. It's why she starts writing letters to Nettie and not to God because
Yeah.
she feels like, well, Nettie's someone tangible that I know I can love and feel love. And so I'm writing to Nettie now
Right.
instead of God. which is like, which
Okay.
is interesting. Like, it's all that to kind of say, like, I just was like, it's her development's out of order from what it was in the book, and I feel like it was so much like
Mm,
richer in the book the way that she structured
mm,
it there versus how it's done in the movie. The whole Color Purple thing in the movie feels almost like an afterthought, where in the book it's like a pivotal moment.
yeah.
Um,
It's funny because I didn't read the book and I thought, you know, I thought it was
yeah,
great,
it's
and I was
I'm just like, oh, I messed up. I should have watched the movie first.
yeah, it's tough coming from a book
Yeah,
to a movie, because we have to concede
yeah,
that okay, a movie's not going to have as much
yeah.
time to, you
Yeah,
know.
I feel similar about Sophia. Sophia is such a rich character in the book, and I think Oprah does her so well that like it kind of
Hmm.
makes up for a lack of her development and the kind of writing. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I feel like Sophia could have been even a better character. And I think they
Mm.
do better with her in the musical, to be honest.
Okay. Okay.
So um, there's that. One thing I really just didn't like is the way they used Harpo. Harpo is like
Mm.
he's just kind of used as a goofy foil, and in the
Yeah.
book he's like very nuanced and complicated, and
Okay.
I'm just like, why are they making Harpo into like he's just kind of like a bumbling fool in the movie, and I just really didn't like
Yeah.
that. Um, And
Okay.
so, like, now that I think about it, maybe, the those people critiquing the movie were onto something as far as Harpo goes. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, and then like another reason the Suge thing threw me off with her thing with her dad is like that's not in the book at all.
Yeah. So I was wondering if I missed something in the movie when that came to the end. I was like, wait a minute, did I
There
miss
was one
something?
scene earlier in the movie. That's another reason why it doesn't work. Not just because it's not in the book, because in the movie you have one scene with her and her dad like earlier on, and it's like a 1 or 2 minute scene. It's like not very long.
Okay.
She like walks into the church and she's trying to talk to her dad, and he just walks out. I don't know if you remember that part.
Okay.
Um, and so yeah,
Vaguely.
see, and then like you
Yeah.
get to the
Yeah.
end of the movie and she's like supposed to be reconciling with her dad. It's like
Yeah.
we didn't like this is very forced. Like what's um
Yeah. Yeah. I was had to make some
yeah.
assumptions there. I was like, I
Now
must have
like
missed
as
something.
like if that were a standalone like short film, it's like, oh yeah, you can kind of be expected to like it's a short film, you've got to kind of like add some pieces on and figure out. But like in the over the course of a movie, it's like it's not in the
Hmm.
book at all. Like you don't have any
Okay.
interactions with her and her and her preacher. Like she
Yeah.
mentions it. She mentions like her
Hmm.
relationship with him, but there's no reconciliation in the book, and there's no like her
Okay.
going and talking with her dad in the book. Um, and
Yeah.
so it's like I don't really understand why they felt like they had to like add this into the movie, and that when they did, they didn't really like fully flesh it out. They just kind of like tacked on a scene in the middle and tacked on a scene at the end. Now the way it's
Yeah.
shot and the way like it all plays out is like really great. Um,
Right. Yeah. It
it
was.
just like felt empty to me personally. If people
I
connect with
think.
it, like I don't have any problem with that. Like I'm glad somebody did, you know.
Yeah. I think it was still powerful, and
I
maybe.
can see that. It just wasn't for me
Yeah.
personally, you know.
Yeah. I think that Danny Glover's character, I didn't want him to have that
Yeah,
resolve,
that's fair.
because he was.
Because he was so awful.
Yeah. Yeah, but he did. So because he did, that kind of makes that scene with Doug and her dad. I feel like you can swallow it a little bit more
Okay.
because it seems like everybody is kind of loose ends,
Yeah.
reconciling, making things right kind of
Yeah.
a thing.
Yeah. And So in the book, Mr. and Seeley actually like end as friends. So they actually are like
okay.
they're fully reconciled in the book.
Okay.
They're as friends, like not like romantically or anything, but like they're
Mhm.
like, hey, because Mr. actually in the book like kind of like re-proposes to her, and she's like, no,
Oh,
no,
really?
we're not gonna do that. You know, you
Yeah.
know, you're who you are and I'm who I am, and we have our past, and now like we can. I'm glad like that you, because Mr. like actually like grows and develops in the book a lot more, and I think
Mm.
it goes back
Okay.
to just Alice Walker like wondering like how do people change, like how did my grandfather who
Yeah.
used to be like this, he's like this, and so Mr.
Mm.
is kind
Yeah.
of like her like thinking through that.
Yeah.
In the movie, he does that act of kindness, but they're never really actually reconciled. There's the scene
Yeah.
where like she sees him out of the window of her shop, um,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
then he like is gone, and there's never like any resolution there. Which Alice
Mhm.
Walker said she did kind of like that, because one of the things she thinks is interesting is like looking at the beginning of how people kind of come back to who they should be. And she said that's kind
Mhm.
of that's Mister's moment for that. But
Mm.
yeah, in the
Yeah.
book, it's like they're cool with each other at the end. Um,
Gotcha.
and I thought it's really it all ties into Seeley's development as someone who comes becomes comfortable with who she is, and
Yeah.
kind of like because of the way she starts to see herself and the way she starts to see, like, one of the big things is like God can be seen in the flowers. God can be seen in how like in another person,
Mhm. Yeah.
and that's one of like the big things. And so because of her perspective change on all that, it's like she's by the end of the book, she's so self-secure that she can
Yeah.
see that Mr. Has learned from his past, and she's like, okay, yeah,
Mhm.
I can love you as a friend again and forgive you. And
Yeah.
to me, that's really powerful. Like, to be able to have a like legitimate friendship with someone who used to abuse you, um, seems dismissive of the
Mhm.
past, but I think in our culture today, that's that would seem like wrong. Like, you shouldn't
Yeah.
be friends with someone who's abused
Right.
you in the past. But the reality is
Mhm.
people do change, and I think that's something Alice Walker was
Yeah.
exploring. And
Yeah.
you can in the movie you can see the seeds of that. It just doesn't get fully developed, which that's not I wouldn't say that's a fault of the movie. That's just something
Yeah.
that I thought was interesting to point out. I didn't
Mhm.
like dislike the movie because it didn't fully flesh that out, because it only has so
Yeah.
much time. Um, and the
Right.
way
Right.
Spielberg talked about it was like, well, it wasn't Mister's movie. Like they actually did have
Yeah.
a scene where they kind of played that forgiveness stuff out,
Oh, really?
that he just
Okay.
didn't end up putting in the movie because he decided, well, this is the women's movie. It's not.
Yeah. It's
I
not
don't
about
need
him.
closure
Yeah.
from Mister.
Yeah.
The other big like quibble I had was like the tone, and it goes back to like stuff with Harpo. Like, there's like all these gags with Harpo that are just like ill-timed, and like the biggest example is in the middle of Sophia's like awesome monologue in the cornfield. It keeps like intercutting
Mhm.
these stupid like stuff with Harpo, like telling Mister like, oh, it was the donkey that gave me these boosts.
It was the donkey.
And I'm like,
Yeah.
why are we interrupting Sophia's like awesome, like heartfelt, powerful monologue with these stupid like gags about Harpo?
Yeah.
Like that's not
Yeah.
in the book at all. Like, why did we?
They needed some comic
But
relief, man.
you don't need comic relief intercut with a powerful monologue.
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
like, and then I don't know, like the Harpo falling through the roof, like over and over was like, I don't know. It's just like, why do we need that in this movie?
Mhm. Yeah.
There's like the brawl that breaks out with Sophia and Squeak and stuff is like, it's like
Yeah.
Looney Tunes. I'm like, what movie are we in now?
Because everybody starts
Yeah.
fighting. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just, and like not only that, but like Squeak flies off like she's, I don't know, like she's Daffy
Mhm.
Duck and like flies off
Yeah.
into the, I don't know. It's just stuff like that in the movie feel like the cartoonish stuff, and like even
Yeah.
like the score at times feels very like cartoonish and weird, and I'm like,
Mhm.
I just didn't like that. It just felt,
It got a little too
yeah,
light
it
for
felt
you.
off to me. Like it just, the tone felt inconsistent. Like I'm like, am I supposed
Sure.
to think this is funny, or am I supposed to like really be like trying to empathize with these characters? It's just like, I don't know, it didn't work for me. Um yeah, that's kind of all my quibbles. A lot of, I will
I
say, a
like.
lot of the themes of the book still shine through despite my
Mhm.
quibbles and whatever flaws um people have seen in the movie. I think a lot of the themes
Mhm.
of the book still do very much shine through, which
Yeah.
says a lot about the film and the material, like the source material, I think.
Yeah. I like Harpo's character because I like, when you have so much heavy
Sure.
stuff, I like some lightness
Yeah.
to it, to
I
kind of
don't
bring a little
I
bit
don't
of.
mind that, you know.
Mhm.
I just like it, just for me personally, I didn't like how it was executed in this movie in particular. Um
Mhm.
I think because, and I think it's not because there was like comic relief. I think it's because of the like Looney Tunes cartoony way it was done. I think that's
Yeah.
I think it's more
Okay.
that than the fact that there were funny moments, cuz like there's funny
Yeah.
moments in the book, like some funny stuff happens, like um
Mhm.
but it's not like cartoonish. And I
Yeah.
think that just kind of comes with Spielberg maybe. That's how he
Okay.
shoots comic stuff a lot, is very
Yeah.
cartoony, but yeah.
You just have to have it in there
Yeah.
somewhere, huh?
Yeah. Yeah, so this themes, were there any like major themes that like when you walked away from the film, you kind of like reflected on and were like, this was a powerful message, I guess, of this movie?
I would say, I said I didn't like how Danny Glover's character had like a act of kindness
Yeah.
there, or like a somewhat
Hmm.
reconciliation. But I would say that showing how people can
Yeah.
change, so not only him, but also Celie, how she
Yes.
became more confident and into her own,
Yes.
so that's a show of like someone changing. But also
Hmm.
Sophia being how dominant she was, and then being very
Yeah.
lowly, you can say, but then kind of getting her fire
Yes.
back. So she kind of went
Yeah.
on a different journey,
Hmm.
So I liked all of
Yeah.
that, and all of that spoke to me in the sense of like people change over time. And it's funny because I don't particularly like these. Would you say it's a coming of
Sure.
age story? Yeah, I'm not really drawn to those types of movies,
Hmm.
but when you see a character start off one way and finish another
Yeah.
way, that's
Yes.
fine.
Yeah, it is.
And I think for going back to Danny Glover, his character just starting off so bad, you know,
Yeah.
but then seeing his humanity come out to where he's on his own, like laying in the chicken
Yeah.
coop and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah,
powerful.
he's definitely well, when I was reading through my notes, I try to like when I'm watching movies for this podcast, I like take notes. I don't typically take notes while I'm watching movies, but I do for this because I kind of need to.
Yeah.
And when Seeley shows up, when young Seeley shows up at Mister's house for the first time, I literally wrote in my notes, "Dang, that house is dirty."
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then when she's gone, it's like it's back to the way it was before, and like
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
like a very like strong visual representation of like the strength of Seeley, even when
Yeah.
she was at her lowest, like that
Mhm.
house was in order.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then when she left, it was back in disorder. Like she was the
Mhm.
one that was truly like bringing order. Like Mister might have been dominating her, but she was the one
Mhm.
bringing order, and she had the power all along. I think is
Yeah.
what that visually shows. And that's what
And it
she
illustrated that.
realizes in the movie.
Yeah.
In both the book and the movie, what you kind of like, I think to flesh out, to go off of what you've been saying and like flesh that out. It's not even like these characters are like they're changing, but the change comes from, I think, them realizing what was there all along.
Yeah.
It's not them like becoming a new person. It's
Okay.
them real like Seeley had that power and that strength all along, but she needed
Yeah.
people like Shug and experiences to show her who she really was.
Yeah.
And same thing with Mister. Like Mister has the seeds of that compassionate person in him all along.
Mhm.
But he needed Seeley like leaving him and showing him those things like from her growth, like to show him that
Mhm.
like Sophia, like it's all the same thing. Sophia knows who she is in the beginning. She loses that and then gets it back and then realizes it
Mhm.
again.
Yeah.
It's a lot
Yeah.
of like the character growth in this is a lot of just these characters realizing like this is who I am and stepping into that.
Right.
And I think that's
Yeah.
so cool. It's so powerful in the book. And like, even though like, yeah, I have flaws, I have quibbles with the character development in the movie, like it still comes through. Like
Mhm.
even for me who has the
Yeah. Yeah.
quibbles, it's just
Right.
such
Right.
a well done story. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. And the acting helps a lot too. As we talked about,
Yeah. For sure.
some powerhouse acting. Um,
And you wouldn't even think that these are, quote unquote, no names or
yeah.
beginners because they signed really brightly in this.
Yeah, I just think one of the things that Glover said, Danny Glover said that I thought was good. He said we all become equal with age and death. And in the
Yeah.
story, these characters have lived their lives basically, and they've become a
Mhm.
part of memory in a different way by the end. And I thought that was really cool. The way he put
Yeah.
that, very insightful. But just as a final thought on that note, one of the things that I think is really well done in the movie is that he bookends the film with Celie and Nettie in the flowers.
Yeah. You have to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and yeah, you have to. And both of these characters have changed, as we talked about, drastically. They've had
Mhm.
different experiences. They've changed a lot, but their love for each other is just like unconditional. And it's not
Yeah.
dependent on like the changes they've been through or what they've experienced. It's not dependent on like, hey, have you grown into the person you're supposed to be or not? Like, it's just based
Right.
on
Right.
their sisters, like, and
Mhm.
they're gonna love each other. It doesn't really matter what
Right.
the circumstances are. Um, And I just thought like those shots of them like in silhouette at the beginning and at the
Yeah.
end, and the flowers playing like they're like playing that hand game, just really
Hmm.
illustrate visually that unconditional love, like despite the passage of time, like
Yeah.
they're sisters no matter what. And I just thought that was really cool. Like,
The significance of that hand game was super cool because even when Nettie was being ripped away from her and she was
yeah,
walking,
yeah,
like they started doing it,
yeah,
I was like,
yeah,
wow.
yeah, just really good. Yeah. And that's like that silhouette is like Spielberg 101. That
Hmm.
dude loves doing those
Yeah.
silhouettes. Um,
Yeah.
and I mean, he knows them really well. So I mean, it's hard to it's, it's hard to blame him for that.
Gotta have a signature
Oh
on
yeah.
it.
But that's really like we've hit most of the the things in the notes. There's a lot of notes on this one. But yeah, so at the end of the day, ratings, we all know, are very subjective and don't really mean anything. But I always like to talk about ratings. What would you rate this, like,
Yeah.
let's say out of 10? Out of 10, The Color Purple is what?
I would say
8?
an 8.
Cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally
8.
fair. I'm like
Solid 8.
on the fence between a 6 and a 7. Like, that's kind
Okay.
of where I am. So like I don't know if you've ever used Letterboxd. It's kind of like a film watching social media, and you can kind of keep a journal, like a diary of like the movies you watch, and
Oh, no, I
yeah,
haven't heard it.
you can
Sounds
log
cool.
them and like write short or long reviews or whatever. You can make
Yeah.
lists and rank things. So it's like I love it.
Interesting.
I use it all the time, but so they do 5-star ratings, and so and you can do half stars too. So so
Okay.
it's basically a 10 out of 10, but it's just
Yeah.
with 5, you do halves. But I like have this thing where if a movie is for me 3.5 star, which is like 7 out of 10 or up, I usually hit the little heart, the
Hmm.
little like, because I'm like, I like this. It's a 7 out of 10 or
Okay.
above. I
Okay.
like it. If a
Okay.
movie is like 2.5 stars or 5 out of 10, like it really doesn't. There's only a few movies like the Star Wars prequels that are like, I'm like, this is a bad
Okay.
movie, but I like it. Like, um,
Yeah.
I grew up with it. I like it. So there's
Yeah.
very, very like there's only like maybe like 2 or 3 that are like that. But a
Okay.
6 or a 3-star, I'm like, those are the ones where I'm on the fence where it might get the heart or it might not. And this is definitely one with
Interesting.
I think this is one with a heart. Because I do
Okay.
like it. I do appreciate it, and I appreciate how like even despite like some of the like filmmaking flaws that I see, like and the writing of it, it's still like
Hmm.
the points still like shine through, and I
Yeah.
appreciate that. And it is like I think still like a beautiful movie, um, even even despite some of the things I mentioned. But yeah, so
It's nice not to get a totally different movie than the
yeah,
book
I think if I would have
to where you don't
I think
even
if I
know.
would have watched this without seeing the book, it would have been a 7 or 8, I think, for me. But it's
Okay.
just
Okay.
it's just like, oh,
Yeah.
I hit my
Tough.
mic. It was just like, oh man, like I'm hitting my mic like Oprah hit Steven Spielberg's space shuttle model. Man, I should have yeah. It's just one of those where it's like, man, that book ruined the movie for me. That
Yeah.
darn book.
Yeah.
Oh man. But yeah, I think that's all we have on The Color Purple. We've gone along. I think this might be the longest episode of the series so far. Uh so
Hey, making
making
history.
history for the Steven Spielberg series, with Christian Robertson here. So yeah, that's The Color Purple. There was a lot more we could have talked about, but I think we've talked for long enough for this episode. So we're gonna go ahead and end our discussion on The Color Purple. Next week, I kind of teased earlier that Christian is going to be joining us again for a little interview on his experience in acting. So look forward to that. And then after that, we'll be continuing the Spielberg series with his movie Empire of the Sun. So I'm excited I haven't seen that yet. So I'm excited. Another blind spot that I'm getting to fill in.
Don't read the book.
Yeah, there is, and I've been listening to it. So I'm not going to finish the book before I have to watch it. So I'll finish the book after I watch the movie. So maybe that'll help.
Good.
But Christian, do you want to plug anywhere where people can follow you or DM you if they want you to act in their movie?
Yeah, like I said, my DMs are always open. You can follow me on Instagram, Christian_J Robertson. I'm also on Twitter at ChristianRob25.
Cool. Yeah, and I'll make sure to link those in the episode description, so you can just go down there and click instead of having to like remember those. So yeah, I'll make sure to do that for you. But yeah, that's all we have for this week. I have been Eli Price for Christian Robertson. You have been listening to The Establishing Shot. We'll see you next time.
We were happy here. For a little while.
But look, I figure it this way. Better to be king for a night than schmuck for a lifetime.